Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei got harem with Sona? Part 6. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. It's so quiet tonight, Rhea commented. She didn't look like she objected though, judging from the way her thumbs were dancing across her phone screen. Yes, it is, Tsubaki agreed. She eyed the clock and after a moment said, if things are still this quiet in 30 minutes, we'll adjourn for the night. If they pick up before then Tomo, you'll make a gusto run. Right, the knight agreed amiably. Usual orders for everyone. Tsubaki opened her mouth to answer, but the council office door was suddenly thrown open, grabbing everyone's attention. Issei Hyoudou burst into the student council room, gasping for breath and looking panicked. Where's Sona Sitri? It's Thursday night, Tsubaki said, rising from the desk and approaching her boyfriend. What's wrong, Hyoudou-kun? Thursday night, guess that answers where Hyoudou-kun is too, then, Kiba muttered. Tsubaki-san, but you wanted me to ask Sona Sitri about something. As Tsubaki and Kiba spoke urgently to each other, Aika turned to Tsubasa, eyebrows raised. What's the deal with Thursday nights? Oh, right, you weren't here when that started, Tsubasa answered with a grin. Back when Ice-chan was doing unofficial it for us, they had an indefinite contract to spend Thursday nights together. It was ostensibly for the computer projects he was working on for the school, but they'd already gotten to know each other pretty well by then, and they were already halfway in love at that point. So Thursdays were their excuse to spend time together. Anyway, when he beat her at chess and became a devil, they kept that going as their weekly date night. Tsubasa beeped her head, looking thoughtful, and then amended, well, they've tried. Stupid shit tends to keep happening on Thursdays. Alright. Tsubaki sounded defeated. This sounds serious enough, I'll have to call Kaichu. Hope Hyoudou-kun's at least wearing pants this time, Momo said with a smirk. We all hope that he is, Tsubaki answered in a dust-dry voice. She summoned up a communication circle. Speak for yourself, Tsubasa stage whispered to Aika, who didn't bother to stifle her snicker. I don't believe you, Issei said flatly as he dished up the stir-fry. That movie's just a myth, right? I promise you, it's real, Sona replied, taking the plate he handed her. The two of them carried their dinner and drinks out to the living room. And it's every bit as bad as the stories say. She walked over to the DVD rack, plucking a case from it, and showed him the cover. Issei eyed it critically, beeping his head quizzically as he read the tagline. The end of a season means the beginning of a new one. Talk about stating the obvious. He looked at his fiancée with surprise. Why do you even have this movie? Because one Isama got very drunk one night or very high on sugar and caffeine. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference with her, Sona replied, rolling her eyes in exasperation at the memory. She'd apparently gotten the movie from a contractor who claimed it was a masterpiece and insisted Riaz and I watch it with her. She snorted. When it was done, she wanted to go back and turn him into an ice sculpture. And she pawned it off on you? He asked curiously, handing the case back. Actually, I offered to take it off her hands, Sona admitted. There's something almost mesmerizing about how ineptly made it is. You'll see. She opened it, popping the disc into the player. Issei watched her do so, and his eyes stayed on her as she walked back to the couch. He didn't know if Sona knew how much more relaxed and smooth her movements were around him now. Or maybe he just knew her well enough to tell by now. In either case, she moved with a water-like grace that made her a treat to the eyes, particularly in what she was currently wearing. Those sleep shorts were essentially glorified boyshirt panties and combined with a thin white camisole to form an outfit that was technically modest but potentially quite erotic. It was definitely working. She beeped her head as she felt his eyes on her. What? Just thinking how graceful you are, Issei said, reaching for her hand. Sona interlaced her fingers with his, letting him pull her down into his lap. You mean you're undressing me with your eyes, she corrected, her smile showing that she had no objections whatsoever. Well, you are the most beautiful girl at school, he grinned. Just so we're clear, then. They kissed briefly, Sona breaking contact before it got too heated. Flattery won't keep me from turning the movie on, Anada, she said lightly. You'll forgive me if I'm more interested in you than the movie, he said with a smile. I suppose that's allowable, she said in a tone of mock consideration. She was about to say more, but her expression soured slightly as she saw a communication circle appear next to her head. Perfect. It's Thursday, Issei pointed out, not quite able to keep a whine out of his voice. I'm well aware, and so is Tsubaki, Sona sighed, mentally accepting the call. She wouldn't do this if it wasn't important. Would you, Tsubaki? Not if I could help it, Tsubaki's voice replied. I'm sorry, but Hyoudou-kun just told me this. Grafia Lucifuge-sama contacted Ria-senpai tonight and said Riser Phoenix plans to visit her tomorrow at school regarding something important. I'm pretty sure he just moved the wedding date up. Damn it, Sona said softly. All right. Did he say what time? After school, Tsubaki reported. Ria-senpai wants you there for moral support and so she can make the formal arrangements for assistance right away. Very well. Sona let out a resigned sigh. Have Kiba-kun assure her we'll be present. Thank you Tsubaki. Sorry to interrupt your evening, Kaichu. Yours too, Issei-san. The communication circle winked out. Raphael Lucifuge? Issei asked curiously. Ria's sister-in-law, Sona explained. She's the House of Grimory's head maid, but she's also one of the most powerful devils alive. She and One-sama were rivals for the Leviathan title. She's nicknamed the silver-haired Queen of Annihilation, and she lives up to it. She shivered. Things are moving faster than I expected. Hey. He squeezed her hand, offering a smile. We'll get through this. Yes, you're right. She returned the smile, though it was still shadowed with concern, and squeezed back. That still doesn't get you out of watching the movie, though. What about making out during the movie? He said with a slight grin, as much to distract her as out of desire. Well, I suppose that's part of the cinematic experience, Sona answered with a smirk. Let me at least get the movie going first, though. She selected play. 2 minutes later. A papier match MRI machine. A papier match MRI machine, Issei repeated, staring incredulously at the TV. I've heard of low-budget movies, but this is no budget. Just keep watching, Sona said in a satisfied tone, resting a hand on his shoulder. The papier match MRI machine, Kaori repeated disbelievingly. I'm serious, Issei insisted. The two of them were walking behind Sona and Tsubaki. The Sitri heiress's peerage was en route to the Orc clubhouse. You have to see this movie. The sheer level of incompetence Sona-sen was exactly right, it's mesmerizing. And this was actually shown in theaters. The knight looked even more skeptical now. Yes, it was, Sona said over her shoulder. He watched that with you, and he's still here. Tsubaki's voice was dry-humored. It must be true love, Kaichu. Well, she sat with me through Returner before we even got together, so fair's fair, Issei commented with a chuckle. The amiable commentary petered out as Sona's peerage entered the clubhouse. Ria's, her servants, and Asia were waiting, as were two people Issei hadn't met before. Pensive expressions were the orc's uniform of the day, and even Ria's could barely muster a wan smile of greeting. Thank you for coming, she said, her tone sincere but tired. Of course, Sona told her. She turned towards her peerage, but looked specifically at Issei. I believe most of you have met them before, but allow me to introduce Urzich's, the Mau Lucifer and Ria's older brother, and his wife, Raphael Lucifuge. She gave the Lucifer and his spouse a respectful bow. Lucifer-sama, allow me to introduce the newest members of my peerage. Please, Sona-san, Surzicha said amiably, making a go-ahead gesture. He was a handsome man in what looked like his early mid-20s, with shoulder-length crimson hair and teal eyes. He and Ria's greatly resembled each other, Issei thought. He wore an impeccably tailored black suit with a muted gold waistcoat, white Oxford shirt, and olive drab necktie. For the effective head of state for Devilkind, he carried himself with remarkable casualness, but there was an undeniable aura of power surrounding him. The woman beside him was stunning, coming close to, in Issei's opinion, rivaling Sona's beauty. She had solemn garnet eyes and long silver hair, plaited into a pair of short forelock braids, and another pair of long thick braids coming down to her waist. She wore an immaculate blue and white maid's uniform and headdress, but despite the servile attire, she projected an aura of authority and power that rivaled that of the man beside her. Sona was speaking, gesturing first at Aika. This is Kiryu Aika-san, my new pawn. Aika bowed politely, and Surzichas gave her a nod and a smile. I'm pleased to meet you, he said. I hear you're quite the geokinetic. The Lucifer is too kind, Aika half mumbled, her cheek slightly pink. This is Murayama Kaori-san, my new knight, Sona said next. She gestured to Kaori, and once again an exchange of bow and nod took place. The Kyoto faction has given her the Shinto holy sword Yuzorajiri to wield, she added. I'm pleased to meet you as well, Surzicha said, smiling. I'm glad you're wielding that on our side. Beside him, Graphia's expression flickered. If Issei hadn't known better, he could have sworn that she'd rolled her eyes. I do my best, Mau-sama, Kaori said softly. Her own face was slightly red. Finally, Sona's eyes flicked to Issei's, and even the blind would have noticed the way her expression and tone softened. And this is Hyoudou Issei-kun, my new rook and my fiancé. It was Issei's turn to go red. He turned even more so as Surzichas actually became animated. You're the one. Ajuka's been talking about you and what you've been doing with your sacred gear. So you've really worked out how to make a magical railgun. Kind of. A certain kind of magical railgun, anyway, Issei said, shifting uncomfortably. Ajuka-sama is being very charitable. Not so much. Trust me, I've known him and Serafal since we were kids. The stories I could owe. He cut his eyes to Graphia, who was pinching his cheek and pulling it like Play-Doh. Graphia, he whined. Remember why we're here, Lucifer-sama, Grafia said in a level voice. You and Issei-kun can play later. Yeah, you're right, Surziches conceded glumly. He cleared his throat, straightening back up. Anyway. Sona-san, thank you for coming, you and your peerage. We'll get this business out of the way as soon as possible. He looked over at Riaz, his expression now guilty. I'm sorry Riaz. It's hardly your fault, Ani-sama, Riaz said, shaking her head. I know exactly who I hold responsible. Before anyone else could speak, a teleportation circle flared to life in the middle of the room. Issei had become familiar with the Sitri and Gremory crests, but hadn't studied any other of the other pillars' crests yet. So, then, this had to be Phoenix. He wondered if Ravel would be accompanying her brother and tried to shove the thought away. The light from the teleportation circle faded and the Orc office suddenly felt very crowded. 15 women and 1 man were now standing in the center of the room, with the women clustered around the man like a royal court. They were all beautiful women and most of them were dressed in a fashion that was at least slightly fetishistic. The exception was Ravel, who wore a frilly dress similar to the one she'd worn in Kyoto. He caught her eye and offered her a wan smile, which she returned, and he exchanged nods with Isabella and Mihi. The scent of yakitori skewers had suddenly appeared in the room. He wondered why. The man was lean and handsome, with stylishly cut blonde hair and dark blue eyes. His features bore a striking similarity to Ravel's, and he wore a burgundy suit with a half-unbuttoned white Oxford shirt underneath the blazer. Despite his good looks, his expression arrogant, lazy, self-impressed was very off-putting. Aika had been right, Issei reflected. He hadn't even opened his mouth yet, but he was coming off as a jerk. Then he did open his mouth, and it was confirmed. Riaz, the man said, his tone expectant, as if waiting for the Orc president to run to him and present her belly like a loyal dog. That was an insult to dogs, really, Issei thought wryly. I'm here. Yes, I see that, Rizer, Riaz replied sardonically. Let's get this over with so you can leave. Rizer Phoenix just smiled lazily. That sharp tongue of yours is charming as always. I'll put it to better use soon enough. Kaori glanced Issei's direction, giving him a did he just say what I think he said. Look. Issei nodded and grimaced. He shifted his eyes toward Sona and the smile turned into a smirk. Sona. Surprised you could pull your nose out of a book. What are you doing here? Offering a friend support, Sona said levelly. I wouldn't imagine that's something you're familiar with. Rizer scowled momentarily before his smirk reasserted itself. I've been hearing rumors about you. They say someone's caught the bookworm's eye. I'm not surprised, Sona replied. I'm still waiting to hear how it's any of your business. Issei watched her from out of the corner of his eye, tensing in case Rizer did something. He really didn't like the way the other man was talking about her, even if there was no sign of sexual attraction. The high-class devil started to add something, then his eyes fell upon Asia and he looked her up and down. Hello there. Rizer, this is Hyoudou Asia, my contracted magician. Riaz put a subtle emphasis on the last 2 words. Pleased to meet you, Asia said in a politely neutral tone. Charmed, my dear. Rizer's smile widened and he reached up a hand to caress Asia's face. Please don't touch me. Asia took a step back. There was slightly more steel in her tone now. Rizer's expression immediately clouded over. What did you say? Asia gulped but stood her ground. I said, please don't touch me. Rizer scowled. The hand reaching up to caress Asia stilled in midair, then reared back for a slap. The hand swung down hard and rebounded just as hard from the magical shield Asia manifested into its path. Her expression was pale with fear, but still determined. The air around her began distorting, ever so slightly. Rizer. Riaz snapped, at the same time that Issei started to lunge forward. Sona held up a hand, arresting his movement, and she gave him a sympathetic but firm look. Riaz was still speaking. She's a contracted magician, not one of my servants. You know they're off limits. What's the difference? Rizer's tone was that of a spoiled child denied a sweet and ready to break something in response. Issei recognized in it the same I'm above consequences attitude Rainer had flaunted and his hands clenched into fists. This time, before he could move, both Sona and Kaori grabbed his wrists. Rizer noticed the motion and turned to look at them, smirking. Got a problem, kid? She your sweetheart? I think my sister asked you to keep your hands off her, Issei said, struggling to keep his voice level. Blue-white sparks began dancing along his knuckles. Both Sona and Kaori winced but held on. Rizer snorted. I'm a scion of the House of Phoenix. The complaints of reincarnate trash don't matter to me. Like I care, Issei shot back. Any big brother worth a damn would tell you to back off. He snorted and assuming Sona's earlier tone, said, I wouldn't imagine that's something you're familiar with. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught exasperation and approval mingling briefly on Sona's face before she smoothed her expression back into impassivity. He also sensed Kaori and Tsubasa not bothering to keep similar reactions off their faces. Riser's nostrils flared and he cut his eyes to Sona, sneering. "Keep your servant under control, Sona." "Issei-kun." Calmly, now. Sona gave him a gently quelling look, holding his gaze until his flames died away, then turned towards Riser. Her tone and expression were markedly chillier. "I apologize for my rook's outburst, Riser. But I agree with his sentiment. Asia-chan asked you to refrain from touching her." Riser snorted. "Why's it matter to you? He's just a servant." Issei marveled at how Riser's own peerage remained impassive to the goings-on, particularly to Riser's disdain for, well, anyone that wasn't him. "Because he's my fiancé," Sona said, her tone as chill as the ocean depths. "Which makes that girl my future sister-in-law. I trust you'll see the wisdom in letting her alone now." Fiancé Riser's sneer finally disappeared, only to be replaced by affronted ire. "You stuck to that stupid chess game rule and let this happen? A low-born reincarnate. And despite his outburst, I find him a far better man than you, even on his worst days." Sona's voice was a knife carved from ice, driving in to flay his sense of superiority. "Consider that." "Enough, Riser-kun," Surziches said. For the first time, genuine authority rang through in his voice. "The rules of a magician contract are clear. You should know that," hung unsaid in the air. "If Asia-san wants to be left alone, do it." Rafia cleared her throat daintily. Despite the demureness of the action, the high-class devils in the room immediately turned their attention to her, and the rising irritation in the room dulled back to a simmer. Such was the reputation of the silver-haired queen of annihilation that even Riser didn't dare vex her. "Enough, please. Let's begin the negotiations." "It hardly seems necessary," Riser groused, dropping onto one of the couches without asking. "You have less than half a peerage, and mine is experienced in the ways of rating games." His aplomb seemed to reassert itself, and he smiled at Riaz. "It'll be better for you to just submit now." "I'll take my chances," Riaz answered stonily. Riser shrugged, his smile verging on a sneer again, and made another gesture. It was almost as if a switch had been flipped. Apparently, he only had two settings. Affronted ire at being disrespected and blithe condescension. Ravel stepped into view, and she gave Issei a look that mingled chiding and admiration before clearing her throat. "I'm Ravel Phoenix, Bishop of Riser Phoenix, and I'll be negotiating on behalf of the House of Phoenix. Ani-sama has granted me free reign." A shadow flickered over her expression for a moment. "I understand," Sona told her, stepping forward to stand beside Riaz. When she resumed speaking, it was in an atypically formal fashion. "I, Sona, Princess Designate of the House of Sitri, wish to enter into a temporary peace loan arrangement with Riaz, Duchess Designate of the House of Grimory, for the purposes of this rating game." The Sitri heiress held out a hand, and a leather-bound tome appeared in it. She flipped it open to a bookmarked page and offered it to Ravel. "I referenced the match between Sinoval Person and Akel Stolas as precedent for this arrangement." "I see." Ravel perused the page, her brows furrowing in thought. Issei found it cute and kicked himself mentally for even thinking it. "Interesting choice for precedent, Sona-san." "It seemed relevant," Sona replied. "It is," Ravel agreed. "Very well. But please realize that citing Person v Stolas opens the field for our house to impose conditions as the challenged." Sona and Riaz nodded. The latter said, "We understand." Issei glanced Riser's direction as the negotiations continued. The high-class devil was lounging on the couch, apparently bored now that he wasn't the center of attention. On a whim, he narrowed his eyes slightly, attempting to subtly reach into the phone. Easy enough with unknown dictator. He started browsing through the phone, careful to keep its touchscreen from waking up. There was a lot of porn on it. A lot of redeeds who resembled Riaz, to one degree or another. Also, a lot of nudes of his peerage. Even the girls in middle school gym uniforms. None of Ravel, though, a fact that Issei was quietly grateful for. Ravel cleared her throat, and that jarred Issei out of his window shopping mode. He carefully withdrew from Riser's phone. Ravel pursed her lips for a moment, thinking. "Riasan, I assume your contracted magician will be filling in as your bishop for the purposes of this rating game." Asia nodded, and Riaz stated, "She's agreed to do so, yes." "Very well, then," Ravel acknowledged with a nod. "First, inasmuch as Ani-sama's peerage is experienced in rating games, Sona-san's peerage is more experienced in actual combat, and bringing Riasan's peerage to full parity would give it a distinct advantage over us. We will not dispute matching numbers with your knight and rook, but ask that you restrict your loan of pawns to 4. Another exchange of looks passed between Riaz and Sona. Neither looked surprised. The Sitri heiress answered, "We find this acceptable." Ravel nodded. "Second, there is the matter of compensation the House of Sitri will owe the House of Phoenix should we triumph." "The usual rate and duration?" Sona asked. "That seems reasonable to me," Ravel agreed. Haori and Issei glanced at Tsubaki, who murmured, "It's a sort of security deposit that's required when one house supports another in a raiding game against a third house. Typically, it takes the form political favors or a financial penalty, owed for a set duration." They nodded, quietly thanking the queen for the explanation. Third point. Sona-san, we would like you to refrain from actively aiding in strategy for this match, Ravel stated. This is not intended as an insult, quite the opposite. Your assistance would, again, give Ryosun's peerage an unfair advantage. Sona's brows furrowed. She didn't look surprised, Issei thought, but she did look displeased. Finally, she said, "Very well. I trust you'll not restrict me from visiting my fiancé during the training, though." "Of course not." Ravel pinked slightly. In that moment, both she and Sona were very cute, maybe too cute to Issei, and he had to look out the window to distract himself. Out of the corner of his eye, he sensed Tsubasa and Aika looking curiously at him. "What date for the match?" Ravel asked. Her brief, slight lapse in composure was but a memory now. "There is a short school holiday called Golden Week that is about to start," Rhea said. "I would like us to have most of that week for training and to commence the match that Saturday." 7 days from now, Sona put in helpfully. "Do you have objections to a nighttime match?" Ravel asked thoughtfully. Rhea shook her head and Ravel suggested, "Then why don't we commence Saturday morning at 12:01 am local time?" "Fine with me," Rhea's agreed. "I believe that's everything?" Sona asked, holding out a hand for the book. Ravel snapped it shut with a flourish, passing the book back. "Yes, No. That's not everything." Riser's voice was unexpected and everyone in the room whipped around to stare at him. "Ani-sama," Ravel said in a displeased tone, "you agreed to let me conduct." Riser waved her off and pointed at Issei. "I want him." "You what?" Rhea's, Sona, and Issei chorused, looking perplexed. "He has a mouth on him and he has no respect for his betters," Riser grated out. "I intend to see that he learns it." "You mean he has no respect for you," Rhea said with a snort. "There's a difference." "You're willing to trade one of your rooks for Issei-kun?" Sona said slowly, both eyebrows raised. "I refuse. Not even both of your rooks would be a fair trade." "Then Rhea's doesn't get to have your help in the match," Riser countered. "I refuse any such agreement." "One moment, please." Ravel held up a hand and walked over to her brother. The two of them talked quietly but intently, Ravel displeased and Riser completely uncaring about his disruptiveness. "I'm not seriously going to be traded to him, am I?" Issei said carefully, trying to ignore the sudden spike of icy dread. "No, that won't happen," Sona said reassuringly. Her expression wasn't exactly certain, though. Finally, Ravel returned, looking pleasantly surprised. Riser did not, but he also seemed bored now, which suggested he wouldn't interfere further. "We have a modified demand. If Ryosun's peerage loses, Hyoudou Issei-sen will be traded to my mother's peerage. She has a full set of evil pieces, but they are effectively unused. There'll be no interference in his personal affairs, up to and including his relationship with Sona-san, but he will be Akasama's retainer and be obliged to follow her commands." Both Issei and Sona relaxed. The latter asked, "I trust your mother will be open to negotiating a trade again at some future point, should this come about." "I imagine she would be open to reasonable offers," Ravel said. She, too, seemed relieved at having headed off a potentially nasty situation. Sona looked at Rhea's and nodded. The Gremory era said, "We find these terms acceptable." "Then we are in agreement," Ravel said with a nod. She turned her gaze towards Surzich's. "Lucifer-sama, would you be willing to witness our pact?" "Of course," Surzicha said calmly. He cleared his throat and spoke formally. "I, Surzichas of the House of Gremory, may Lucifer of Devilkind, act as witness for this pact. Let those who break it do so at their own peril." "So be it," Sona, Rhea's, and Ravel chorused. Riser simply snorted and turned away. It was, Issei found, a surprisingly brief affair. Sona, Rhea's, and Ravel simply restated the terms that they'd agreed to and named the pieces being temporarily traded to the Gremory heiress. It was interesting to hear that Saji was referred to as a pawn of 4 and that he was referred to as a rook by mutation piece. As they repeated the opening words of agreement, the crimson light flared brightly again, then faded entirely. "Our business is concluded, then," Ravel said, offering the heiresses and the Lucifer and, of course, the silver-haired queen of annihilation respectful bows. She hesitated, then nodded at Issei again, giving him that same wan smile from earlier. He returned it. Riser stood again, not bothering to make his farewells. Instead, he stalked to the center of the room, pointedly looking out the window as Ravel formed the teleportation circle. He continued to look away huffily even as they disappeared. Once they were gone, Rhea's let out a sigh of relief. "Glad that's over." "So am I," Surzicha said with a sigh of his own. He sat down on one of the couches and looked towards Grafia. "Grafia, we're off the clock now." Rafia gave him a long-suffering look but sat beside him, her posture relaxing fractionally. As she sat, her maid's outfit morphed and changed, replaced with a stylish black and gold blouse and long black skirt. Riaz watched their interplay with good-natured amusement. She looked concernedly at Asia, who still had her magical shield up. "Are you alright?" Asia let out a breath and let it disappear. "Yes. I'm sorry about that. He reminded me a little of Selzen." "Yes. I can definitely see how you'd feel that way," Sona said sympathetically. She turned a gently reproachful look upon her fiancé. "Much as I share the urge to knock Riser's teeth out, Issei-kun, please control yourself better next time." Riaz wasn't going to let him do anything to Asia-chan. Understood. Issei didn't feel particularly remorseful about it, but he could see Sona's point. She eyed him for a moment, gauging his reaction, before nodding. "No, indeed," Riaz agreed. "Contracted magicians are exempt from the traditions regarding one's wife's peerage. I don't know where he gets the idea that rules don't apply to him." "So this is a new development, then?" Tsubaki asked dubiously. "He's always had that sense of entitlement, but it seems to have spiraled out of control in recent years," Surziches said. "The last time I saw him was 3 years ago, just after he had started participating in raiding games. He wasn't all that much better, but he wouldn't have tried that with Asia-san. This recent thing is troubling." "Yes, indeed." Sona's expression showed her agreement. "I suspect the reason he wasn't worse behaved is Ravelsen's presence. The fact that she was negotiating on his behalf suggests that his family is aware of things." "Is she really that trusted by them?" Kaori said in surprise. "I think she's younger than Ice and I are." "She is," Sona confirmed by a nod. "She'll likely be taking over the family's business dealings once she comes of age. We can probably take her decisions as representing the feelings of the House of Phoenix as a whole." She shook her head in sympathy for the blonde girl. "She's probably at least half in his peerage to try and keep him from going off half-beaked. I don't envy her." Issei whistled softly at that. "She's a smart girl, for sure. Tough, too. We saw that in Kyoto." "Indeed." Sona looked towards Riaz. "We should discuss the terms for my peerage's support." "Please, step into my office," Riaz said with a sardonic smile, gesturing towards the couches. She turned towards Akeno. "You and the others may retire for the evening. Have some fun. There won't be much fun involved with next week." Akeno inclined her head and she left the room with Kaneko and Kiba. The latter lingered outside the doorway, clearly waiting for Tsubaki. "Tsubaki, you and the others can take the night off as well. Kaori, Saji-kun, please be ready to leave by." Sona looked at Riaz, raising an eyebrow. "Tomorrow afternoon would be best," Riaz said. "Meet back here by 5 in the afternoon. My family has a mountain villa we can use for training." 5 in the afternoon, then, Sona agreed, sitting on the couch opposite Surziches. "Ah, Issei-kun, please stick around. This will involve you." "Sure," Issei said with a nod. Somehow, he wasn't very surprised. "Ah, should Saji and Kaori-san stay, too? If this is about the raiding game." "It's not. And this won't concern them, at least not directly," Sona told him. She gestured to the spot next to her and the rook joined her on the couch after bidding his peerage mates goodbye. "Call me if you need me, Kaichu," Tsubaki said. Her eyes had already drifted towards Kiba and the two of them walked off the moment she left the room. Sona's peerage dispersed as well, although Tsubasa and Kaori cast curious looks back at Issei. All he could do was shrug, he wasn't sure himself what was up. "So how, exactly, am I involved in this?" Issei asked curiously. "Or, maybe, why is a better question." "Because Sona is staking most of her favors on you, Hyoudou-kun," Riaz answered with a smile. Issei gave her a bemused look. "For developing the summoning app? That's gonna take longer than I expected." "Ajuka tells me that's often the case with R&D," Surziches said. "It's impressive what you've managed to accomplish so far. That you've actually managed to summon Sona-san with it." "I was stressed and in pain and desperate, though," Issei pointed out. "That's not a very useful baseline for an app." "Don't sell yourself short, Anada," Sona told him. She squeezed his knee. "The fact is that you were able to summon me through that app. The degree to which we'll end desire fuel devil magic make the app viable for our usage. It'll just take further research and refinement to make it something usable for contractors and other supernatural factions." Riaz grinned. "Lucky you, Hyoudou-kun. 17 years old and you're getting a research grant." Issei whistled softly and smiled slightly. "And I'm not even tenured. Okay, I'll take it. I'm afraid that asking for co-financing from the House of Grimory is just half of it, though," Sona stated. "One-Isama will do what she can, of course, but shepherding Issei-kun's career along would be even smoother with 3 Mayu keeping an eye on him." "Serafal and Ajuka aren't enough?" Surziches asked with a good-natured smirk. "I know he's made a good impression on them, and that does carry weight with me. Let me mull that over." At the very least, all things considered, I won't block any moves they make on his behalf. Sona pursed her lips and nodded. Alright Surzuki-sama. I can live with that for now. Honestly, I'm not sure you even need me, Issei-kun, Surzuki added. Between your performance with Sona-san's peerage against Selsun and you two's actions in Kyoto and what you've been managing with your sacred gear. You're already on the fast track. He grinned. Show me your railgun attack though and that'll be another point in your favor. Sure. That is, if it's okay with Issei glanced at Sona. His fiancée snorted gently. Go ahead, then. We'll be discussing details here. I'll call you when we're done and we can meet at Gusto. I'll go along, Sona-san, to make sure our boys don't get into trouble. Grafia rose gracefully. Thank you, Grafia-sama, Sona said, giving her a respectful nod. Even better, Surzuki enthused. Shall we? Issei bounced to his feet. Sure. Let me grab my bag, all my ammo's in there. Surzuki let out a soft whistle. That's not bad at all. And that's just with the hairpins you had in your bag. He waved a hand at the teacup-sized holes Issei had left cored through the brick wall. It seemed more discreet than lugging bundles of roofing nails around school, Issei said with a laugh. We keep a stash of stuff out here for training, so I'll show you how it works with those. He moved some rubble to reveal an old cooler and pulled some bundles of nails out. As he did so, he looked at the Lucifer. For being the effective ruler of all devils, the guy was pretty easy to talk to. Just like with Seraphil, it was easy to forget that he was literally centuries old. Is this really that impressive? I mean, I've seen Ria-senpai's power of destruction before. It actually is, Surzuki told him. It's true that there are a lot of magical techniques that are flashier and more powerful. But the fact that you've innovated this is remarkable and opens the door for other developments. And Ijuka has shown me video of you using the nails. I've been wanting to see that. I think you're also able to make better use of it than others might, Grafia said thoughtfully. It was the first time she'd spoken since they'd arrived at the ruined mansion. You're using both electrokinesis and your sacred gear to control the projectiles, but the former is mostly for the acceleration and punch. The sacred gear is what you use for aim and stabilization, right? Yeah, Issei agreed with a nod. It's not quite to the guided missile stage yet, though. He grinned at her. It took me a few days to really realize that's what I was doing. You figured that out just by watching, Grafia-sama. She's one of the underworld's most powerful magicians, Issei-kun, Surzuki replied, his voice full of pride in his wife. She knows what to look for in magical techniques. You're closer than you might think to that guided missile, Surzuki's queen told Issei, a slight gleam of approval in her eyes. And even as matters stand, you're still much more accurate than someone just using electrokinesis would be. Issei nodded his thanks and concentrated slightly, affixing several bundles of nails to his arms. He stepped back out towards the wall and made finger guns again. As he did, he summoned his electrokinesis and the first two bundles of nails broke apart and rotated around his hands. Wind and air distortion began to swirl around him more strongly than before and he called out, "Stay back." Grafia nodded and Surzuki gave him a thumbs up. Issei brought his arms down, leveling them with a flourish and firing, and the roofing nails shot forward at somewhere around Mach 5. He was aiming for the holes he'd punched through before. As a result of this, not only did the nails leave platter-sized holes in the wall this time, but the spiderwebbing of damage spread rapidly enough through the wall that it began crumbling. Issei repeated this until his ammo was all gone and 10 meters worth of wall was quietly smoking rubble. Finally letting his electrokinesis die away, he turned slowly back towards the two senior devils. So, that's the full-powered version. I think Ijuka-sama clocked it at Mach 5 or more. Surzuki looked well, he looked like a kid who'd just seen his first professionally done fireworks display. That was amazing. It sure made mincemeat of that wall. He grinned. I just wish I'd been able to see what you pulled off in Kyoto. Boss Dragon is gonna need a lot more work. Issei rubbed the back of his head. It only worked as well as it did because Sona-chan and Ravel-san were there to help me aim and they and Mihi-san had to overcharge my electrokinesis, too. This was quite impressive enough, Grafia told the young rook. Well thank you, both of you. Issei reddened slightly. Hearing that from the two of you makes me feel like this is actually something cool. Rest assured, Surzuki-sama will approve of anything that punches holes in walls, Grafia said in an affectionately arched tone. Surzuki jokingly cringed. Well, it looked like it was mostly jokingly, anyway. Issei wondered if he and Sona would resemble them after a few centuries. There were worse things to aspire to, anyway. You really won't be around. Not after tomorrow night. Katsuyui stared at her best friend in disbelief. It wasn't my first choice either, Kaori sighed. It's some stupid devil thing. Some stupid shit with Ria-senpai's family and Kaichu is obligated to support her. At least the accommodations should be nice. At least you're going somewhere. Katis stretched and yawned. I'm stuck here, helping One-chan with the new students. She beeped her head. So is Hyoudou gonna be there? Of course he's gonna be there, Kaori replied with a chuckle. He and the Kaichu will probably be treating it like a mini honeymoon. It was interesting how the thought of that didn't sting as much. Maybe it was a sign of how she was coming to accept the possibility of having something like that with Issei too. Addis was silent and Kaori looked at her friend. What? Just it's interesting, isn't it? Addis shrugged. Maybe you and Nagahama are right, maybe he's gotten himself under control. She smirked. Or maybe the Kaichu's keeping him under control somehow. I kinda think he has, Kaori said carefully. She had to be careful here, this was the first real sign that Addis was actually starting to accept Issei being on the level. I guess it's both, really. He was looking for something to balance him out, I suppose. I wouldn't have believed that before Nagahama joined his club, Addis went on. It's funny, when you think about it. He had to become a devil to learn how to behave. She chuckled. It's more complicated than that, but yeah, Kaori admitted, snickering softly. I think he's going out of his way to show Nagahama that he's harmless. He wants her to convince the rest of the club he's not up to anything. I guess that makes sense. Heck, if he keeps this up, I might be convinced. Addis smirked suddenly. So. You said there's someone you have your eye on. Is it Saji-kun? He's kinda cute. I'd have to square off against Nomura and Hanakai-san to get a shot at him, Kaori snorted. Besides, he's cute, but he's a bit of a stuck-up jerk, I'm finding. Not that much of one, but enough to be a turn-off. They can have him. Then who is it? Addis pressed. Not Kiba-kun, right? I've heard he and the Fukakechu are seeing each other. They're starting to, the knight acknowledged. I'm not even sure it's gonna go anywhere. Let me sit on it until after Golden Week and then I'll tell you. Sure, Addis said dubiously. For a moment she watched Kaori, as if trying to puzzle something out, then stood up. Well, we've got tonight, wanna catch a movie? You are on, Kaori agreed and she fished out her phone, pulling up the local listings. This is not how I expected tonight to go, Saji said glumly. Issei could only nod in agreement. This wasn't what he'd had in mind for the first Saturday of Golden Week, either. Upon their arrival, Riaz had dinner ready for them. It was only after that, when everyone was full and complacent, that she'd announced that everyone would be spending the night out in the forest in pairs. Endurance and camaraderie training, she'd called it. Worse, Sona had agreed to it, seeming almost serene about not having Issei with her that evening. Much as he hated to admit it, there was some sense in assigning Saji as his partner. He got along, more or less, with Ria's peerage. Even Akeno's endless teasing was, generally, good-natured. And he and Kaori were friends. Even now, his mind shied away from contemplating that further. Saji really was the teammate that he clashed with the most. "Can't believe we're out here," the pawn was complaining, and Issei suppressed a grimace. He didn't want to be out here either. But he was pretty sure that mentioning where he did want to be would drive Saji further into a sulk. "Me, either," he said carefully. "Maybe that would be safe." Saji's face took on a slight pout, but he didn't say anything else. Silence reigned for several minutes. "It's not fair." It was surprising that Saji broke the silence. What was surprising was that his tone wasn't sulky. Or, at least, he was trying to keep it from being that. "It's just not fair." He let out a sigh. Yeah, well, all Issei could do was shrug. It wasn't like he couldn't understand where the other guy was coming from. "I get it, you know." He hesitated, then pushed forward. "If Sona-chan had wanted someone else it would have ripped me up, too. But I would have tried to support her anyway." Saji nodded. His expression was one of reluctant agreement. "I'm trying." Issei shrugged. It didn't really seem like he had been, but it probably looked different to Saji. Hell, it'd probably look different to him if he'd been in his shoes. "I was in her peerage for months before you were reincarnated. Followed her every direction, worked to make her proud of me. It didn't matter, though. I'd lost before I'd even started, maybe even before she started visiting you on a weekly basis." He let out a sigh. "I'd give my life for her, but she'd already made up her mind. It's like I wasn't even there." "I get it," Issei repeated. He really did. "And it's you." The pawn managed to pack a remarkable amount of resentment into the last word, but it wasn't vehement. It was more like tired or resigned by this point. "I'd never seen someone so out of her league. But then you turned out to have a neo-longinus and everything else." He was speaking slowly, but with growing sureness. Issei had the feeling that this was the first time Saji had really examined his reactions. "I know." Issei let out a sigh of his own. "I still feel like she's out of my league, too. Way out." Saji snorted. "So do I." He fixed Issei with a stern look. "But she thinks you're worthy of her." So he shrugged, wearing the look of a man forcing himself to face an unpalatable fact. "So be worthy of her." Yeah, okay. I will be." Issei relaxed. That was probably as close to his blessing as Saji was ever going to give. You know, it's not like you're doomed to be alone. You've noticed Haruko-chan and Momo-san, right? Saji's eyes widened. Apparently he hadn't. Issei squelched the urge to burst out laughing at his look of shock. Haruko-chan. Momo-san. They've both got major crushes on you, Issei said. He couldn't quite keep the grin off his face. You know, they're both nice girls and really cute. You might even be able to convince them to share you. Saji wore a gobsmacked expression. Thoughtfulness was peeking through, though. Give that some thought, Issei told him, smirking good-naturedly. He really did wish the three of them some happiness in whatever combination it ended up being. That didn't mean he couldn't needle Saji about it. Well, what about you? Saji suddenly gave him a quizzical look. Issei blinked in surprise. What about me? Saji chuckled. You're giving me crap about being oblivious and then you do the same thing. Nah. I'll let you figure it out. No, it's not enough that Kaichu's letting you have a harem. He trailed off deliberately. Hey, that's not fair. Issei protested. I told you who was interested in you. And you were smirking the whole time, Saji retorted. Although I'll tell you what. You have dragon senses, including that scent thing, right? Yeah, Issei answered slowly. Do you? I haven't really tried developing it, Saji admitted. Maybe I should. But I've done a little reading. If the scent thing works the way it looks like it does, then the scents are strongest when the feeling is mutual. It was his turn to smirk good-naturedly as he unrolled his bedroll and made himself comfortable. Give that some thought. Hey now, Issei trailed off, groaning inwardly. He couldn't avoid thinking about it now. Night, Saji said blithely. Night. Nai-san, you don't look very well, Asia said concernedly. Did you sleep at all last night? Not really, no, Issei answered with a yawn. Welcome back, you two, Ria said with a smile. Breakfast is ready and we've just been waiting on you two. Afterwards, get cleaned up and we'll talk about this afternoon. Thanks, senpai, Saji said gratefully and Issei nodded in agreement. The two Sitri servants joined their comrades around the breakfast table. It was loaded with freshly prepared food and the scent of it made his mouth water. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, the magic word, itadakimasu, was said and the devils fell to eating with a will. Just as breakfast wound down, there was a knock at the front door. Oh, Hyoudou-kun, could you get that? Riaz asked. Sure, Issei said easily, rising from the table. Suppressing a yawn as he walked, he opened the front door and blinked in surprise. Ka-san. Hi, son. Rio smiled at him. Take my bag, please. Sure. Issei stood aside so his mother could enter and obediently took her carryall. What are you doing here? I'm going to be helping Riasan train you guys, she announced as she entered the dining room. Good morning, everyone. Ka-san. Asia said, looking pleased. You'll be here all week. That's right. Rio sat next to her adopted daughter. I'll be working with the magicians in the peerage, which means you, Akeno-san, and Riasan. I assume you'll be helping me with pyrokinesis, too? Issei asked. He hadn't liked how his fire had started waning in Kyoto. This might be a good opportunity. Naturally, she replied with a nod. You've done very well for having awakened to it recently. But you need a lot of refinement to get to your true potential. The further you can get down that road this week, the better. Yeah, you're right, Issei inwardly sighed. He'd really have rather had the week with Sona in a lake house, but this would be good for the long run. The afternoon had been focused on basic physical training. Everyone in the peerage, even Asia, was in superb condition by human standards. The devil idea of good shape, however, was somewhat different and they had worked hard enough to be ready and ravenous for dinner. The Gremory heiress clearly believed in efficient usage of time. Even as they worked on the massive meal she prepared, Ria set a stack of photos on the dinner table. These are the members of Riser's peerage. I know some of us have been studying up on them in particular. I know Sona's peerage has been watching his past matches and taking notes. But I want to get us all on the same page about their abilities. Issei nodded, pausing to wash down a bite of Hamburg steak. He glanced at the first photo. That's Riser's queen, right? Ubaluna, I think. Riaz nodded. She was part of a disgraced Grasauberer family before she was reincarnated. Her specialty is pyrokinesis. They call her the bomb queen and for good reason. I know her reputation, Rio said. She's supposed to be very good. But Issei will be even better when he's fully trained. That probably won't be by the end of the week, Issei replied, laughing self-deprecatingly. That depends on how hard you work, she replied with a smile. She'll be my playmate anyway, Akeno stated, smiling fiercely. She then nodded at the picture of Ravel. You fought beside her in Kyoto, Hyoudou-kun. What do you think of her? The first word that came to Issei's mind was beautiful. He tried to shove that thought down. She's smart and observant. If Riser listens to her advice, we could be in for trouble. If he does, Riaz agreed. I doubt he will, though. But let's plan for the worst case scenario. Issei tapped the photo of Isabella. She's a good fighter. She mentioned she was in the army, though she didn't say which army. Israeli, Riaz answered. I believe she was in Mossad as well. Mossad? Kaori said. As in the intelligence agency? Riaz nodded. Issei gave the knight a surprised look. You've heard of it? I watch movies, Kaori replied, a little indignantly. Her cheeks were slightly pink. Shulin, the other rook, has an MMA background. Issei was a little surprised to hear Kaneko pipe up. She ran into some legal trouble, though. That's how Reiser found her. The more I learn about him, the less I like, Kaori commented sourly. Try knowing him since childhood. Ria's tone was no less sour. This is why we're putting effort into learning about his peerage. Knowledge is a weapon, and we'll need every weapon we can lay our hands on. Her eyes fell on Saji, and he straightened up. I assume you mean me, he said. I do, she said with a nod. You're going to be the key to this, Saji-kun. By the end of this week, I think we'll be ready to take out his peerage. But Reiser himself has talents that they don't, with the exception of Ravel. And those are the things we need to neutralize, or at least weaken. Saji nodded, his expression sober. I'll do my best, senpai. But I don't know how well absorption line will do with that. That's what we'll be working on this week, Saji-kun, Akeno spoke up. Her expression was almost serene. Endurance and control. Anything we can do to weaken his fire and his regeneration. The queen pursed her lips, a touch of sourness entering her eyes. Hell knows he won't surrender without being smacked around hard. So he won't surrender at all? Issei asked. Not even if we wipe his entire peerage out. Riaz shook her head. It's doubtful. In a normal rating game, that would probably be enough to force a victory on points, but unofficial ones tend to be very fluid in how rules are interpreted. In some ways, that's to our benefit. Sona wouldn't have been able to loan you guys to me and let us reach near parity. But as far as this goes, it also means that the only sure way to actually win is to take out the King Reiser, in this instance, or to force him to resign. And, frankly, the level of power necessary to force the latter is probably functionally equivalent to the power necessary for the former. And if we kill him? Issei asked flatly. Riaz snorted. As a peer of the 72 pillars, I would decry that as an unfortunate fate that such a distinguished scion of the House of Phoenix could not possibly deserve. As the woman engaged to him, if I thought it would help, I'd hold him down while you did it. A dark chuckle rippled around the room at that thought. Even those who had only encountered Reiser Phoenix once could relate. Fortunately, he tends to stick to the same tactics, Riaz continued. He relies on his peerage to distract his opponents, and his pyrokinesis and immortality to overwhelm and demoralize them. Aichu said he'd had some losses, Kaori said, taking a sip of her root beer. Both of them were to allies of his family, Riaz explained. And they were early in his rating game career. It's almost certain that he threw those matches as a favor to a family friend. That's something we definitely can't count on. So Saji's the linchpin, Issei mused. Maybe Kaori-san and Akeno-senpai too. Kaori-san has a holy sword and senpai is your most powerful servant. That's about the size of it. Riaz and Akeno exchanged looks and for a moment there was some surprising tension there, as if there was something they'd been arguing about. You too, if possible. You would bring a lot of firepower to the table. She let out a breath. Best case scenario is that all of you get to his base. But, at minimum, it has to be Akeno, Saji-kun, and Murayama-san. This is gonna be a long week, isn't it? Saji said, exaggerated weariness in his tone. Everyone at the table chuckled in rueful agreement. What would be really useful is if we could get him off balance right at the start, Riaz continued, looking thoughtful. Even if it was just for a few minutes, right after he had his peerage positioned. Some kind of distraction, huh? Issei asked. Like an explosion, or some kind of I dunno somewhere in the back of his mind, a stray thought started nagging at him, but he couldn't quite place it. An explosion would be too big, Akeno pointed out. It could make his peerage react in ways we hadn't anticipated. We need them moving in their usual patterns, or as close to them as possible. Something that would be sure to distract him, and mostly him. Issei stared at the wall, not noticing how his half-distracted tone was starting to draw attention. He blinked, swiveling back towards Riaz. Maybe something to do with his phone. He was fiddling with it pretty much the whole time he wasn't talking when he came for the meeting. It's a possibility. Riaz beeped her head, looking slightly skeptical. That skepticism starting waning as she remembered something. Your sacred gear, it can control electronics, too. Not just ferrous objects. Issei nodded. I've been testing it a lot. I, spent a little time poking around inside his phone on Friday. Just to see if I could do it without him realizing. It worked. The skepticism was now completely gone from Ria's expression. Yes. In that case, yes, that could work. What did you have in mind? He laughed, rubbing the back of his head. Probably some really annoying but catchy song or video. Max the volume and set it on repeat and keep his screen blank so he can't switch it off. He paused, then offered, of course, if anyone has a better idea. Riaz chuckled. I think that would be just fine. It doesn't have to be anything profound, just annoying or distracting enough that it grabs his attention for a few minutes. Her expression went wary. What exactly did you see inside his phone? Issei shifted uncomfortably. Nothing that would improve your opinion of him. Mostly pics of his peerage. Riaz wrinkled her nose. That'll do. You realize that it probably won't work for more than a few minutes, Kiba reminded Issei. The night had been quiet for most of the evening. I know, Issei agreed. But if we can surprise him, keep him off balance, for that time, it'll only help us. Kiba nodded. Yeah. I get it. Riaz nodded approvingly. It costs us nothing to try and might help. We need a song that's really distracting, Akeno mused. Preferably something loud and energetic. Even better if it gets stuck in your head easily. I think I have that. Everyone looked at Rio in surprise and Issei's mother smiled impishly as she pulled out her phone. She pulled up her music player, selected a song, and hit play. Eyebrows rose around the table as the song started to play. Riaz spoke up first, eyes sparking with recognition. I haven't heard this song in years. It ticks all the boxes, Kaori added, tapping her fingers on the table in time with the drumbeat. Ah-san, that's brilliant, Issei said, grinning. Wait a minute, he closed his eyes, concentrating. In the house of Phoenix's ancestral estate, Riser was having a private strategy session with Yubaluna and two of the kitchen maids. True to form, he had selected the maids for something other than their bipedical talents. His suit pants were across the room, slung over a settee, and so he was unable to see the phone light up as Issei remotely accessed it, uploading the song in question to Riser's music library. Riser thought nothing of it when he saw the upload complete notification in the morning. And it's on his phone now. Issei looked rather satisfied with himself. Your sacred gear? Rio stared at her son, stunned. It's that powerful. The Inkaichu have done a lot of testing with unknown dictators' technomantic range, Kaori piped up. Issei nodded. As long as I'm in the same dimension as the electronic device and I've accessed it before, I should be able to manipulate it. He looked at Riaz. How far are we from the Phoenix territory? Not all that far, Riaz told him. 1,000 kilometers or so, I think. The Dracona crook grinned. Should be a piece of cake, then. How far did you test it in the world? Rio asked curiously. Between Kuo and San Francisco, Issei said, scratching the back of his head. It's true, Kaori said. He spent almost 2 hours talking to me while he and Sona Kaichu walked around Fisherman's Wharf. And Kaori-san had my phone, Issei finished. Akeno nudged Kaori. So why exactly was it you that Issei-kun was calling? I wasn't calling anyone, Issei said quickly. I left it with Kaori-san to demonstrate that I was using the sacred gear by itself. Here, if you've got your phone, I'll demonstrate. No. That's quite alright. Akeno smiled sweetly. I don't think it'd work quite as well. We don't have quite the same rapport. Issei shot the queen an old-fashioned look. It was easier than gauging Kaori's reaction. He relaxed in his chair after a moment. The day had been exhausting, but a productive kind of exhausting. And, he thought with some mild guilt, whatever happened at the end of the week, he and Sona would still have each other. He knew nothing would affect that. Ravel wrinkled her nose as she entered the study that her brother used as his office, tablet tucked neatly under one arm. Not that his idea of office work was anything like hers. She was still half surprised he didn't expect her to join his peerage-wide training sessions. The scene as she entered was relatively sedate. It was only Yubaluna attending him right now, wearing a nightgown that barely qualified for the name. Riser wore a crimson bathrobe and reclined on his couch, smiling languidly as Ravel entered. Ah, Ravel. What brings you here this late? I've put together a report on Sona-san's pieces that she's loaning Ryo-san, Ravel announced. As her brother assumed a bored expression, she made a mow of irritation. This is important, Ani-sama. Our peerages are at near parity in strength now, if not in numbers, and the pieces being loaned have special talents. This won't be a walkover. You worry too much, Ravel, Riser replied, adopting the indulgent tone of an older brother playing tea party with his little sister. Ravel resisted the urge to put a firebolt between his eyes, not least because it would have no permanent effect. But, go ahead. Unnoticed by him, Yubaluna turned her attention to the younger devil. Ravel had some modest fondness for her brother's queen, the woman was certainly competent and observant. Ravel consulted her tablet. First, regarding the pawn being loaned. Saji Genshiro is worth 4 pawns and is the bearer of the Vritra Sacred Gear Absorption line, which has an ability to drain power from his opponents and transfer it to his allies. He's also a competent technique-style fighter. Riser didn't seem to be paying attention, being more focused on his crystalline goblet of wine. Ravel let out an irritated sigh and continued. The knight being loaned, Murayama Kaori, is a holy swordswoman, wielding the Shinto holy sword Yuzurigiri. Her family has had a kenjutsu school of their own for several generations, and she has been training intensively in their style since her childhood. We may need to keep an eye on her, especially if she has a holy sword, Yubaluna noted, then lapsed into silence at Riser's irritated look. I couldn't agree more, Yubaluna-san, Ravel concurred. Finally, the rook being loaned is Hyoudou Issei. Sona's boy toy, Riser said with a sneer. Her fiancé, yes, Ravel corrected him. He's a dragon and a pyrokinetic, in addition to his sacred gear. He has ties to the Kyoto faction through his parents, who are friends with Yasaka. Remember, I fought alongside him in Kyoto. He's not someone I'd want as an opponent. Which sacred gear does he have? Yubaluna asked curiously. She seemed slightly impressed by the rook's background, even if her king did not. Unknown dictator, one of the potential neo-longinuses, Ravel told her. He's developed a unique magical attack by combining its ferrokinesis with electrokinesis. I've seen it at work in Kyoto, he used it to level the old Satan faction's base. To be perfectly honest, Ani-sama, I think he's the most dangerous out of the three of them. They're all low-class cum, Riser said dismissively. Ravel marveled at how Yubaluna kept her composure at the slur. I don't care what kind of skills they might have. They're no match for my peerage. You're wrong, Ani-sama, Ravel insisted, ignoring the spark of disbelief and anger in his eyes at being gainsaid. You need to take this seriously. They may not be able to win, but the margin is much smaller now. You can't afford to be lax about this. You worry too much, he said again, and suddenly looked thoughtful. That worried Ravel. He has a neo-longinus, you said. He does, Ravel said with a nod. He's also highly intelligent as you'd expect from someone who won over Sona Sitri. He's supposedly working on some kind of technomagical app that could replace paper summoning. Yes, whatever, Riser said, waving her off. It was another of his annoying personality traits to assume that something he couldn't understand or that didn't interest him was of no importance. I want his sacred gear. He can't exactly take it off and give it to you, Ravel replied. Her tone was heavily sardonic to mask the sudden sense of unease. No. I guess I'll just have to kill him and take it. Riser said in the same tone that one might order dinner with. Ravel stared at him. That sense of unease had been right on the money. Ani-sama. That low-born scum is an affront to devil society. Not enough he's claimed an heiress of the pillars as his wife, even a mousy shrew like Sona Sitri. That he has a sacred gear, to a longinus. It's an insult to me. He insulted me when we visited Ria's. You made a pass at his sister and tried to strike her when she brushed you off, Ravel reminded him. A quiet kind of panic had started churning in the back of her mind. His reaction may have been intemperate, but you were out of line, Ani-sama. Even the Lucifer agreed with that. That doesn't matter. As usual, Riser's assessment of his own conduct began and ended at me, so it was justified. He has a neo-longinus, and he's taken Sona Sitri as his betrothed. It's an affront to the pillars. It's a slap in the face to me. It has nothing to do with you, Ravel said softly, quickly. We swore an agreement witnessed by the Lucifer, Ani-sama. If we win, Hyoudou Issei is to be traded into Akasama's peerage and be allowed to continue his relationship with Sona-san. This violates that agreement. The agreement offends me as well, Riser replied with a negligent gesture. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not bound by it. Ravel gulped. She had to find a way to divert her brother from this. How could he not see how this would affect the House of Phoenix's agreements and treaties? If the other pillars believed they couldn't be trusted to keep their word, or if they believed Riser would violate them at a whim. That was the only reason. Not because her brother was talking about murdering another devil, even a low-class reincarnate, or because there was something about that reincarnate smile. Not in the slightest. Ani-sama, consider what that would do to our family's reputation, she said, carefully keeping a pleading note out of her voice. If the other pillars don't think the word of the Phoenix can be trusted, it'll only hurt the family. Riser shrugged. Ravel gritted her teeth, suppressing the urge to smack him. Ani-sama, if that's not enough, consider his relationships. He has familial ties to the Kyoto faction and personal friendships with both the Leviathan and the Beelzebub. Not to mention Sona Sitri, who would likely make it her life's work to take vengeance. I'll grant you, it's rare for a reincarnate to be that well connected, but it is the case here. Giving all those people a reason to dislike you strikes me as unwise. Riser's expression was mulish, offended by the thought of any of those people being an actual threat to him. Even two of the four Satans. His existence offends me, Ravel. And I want his sacred gear. The house will just have to deal with that. Beside him, Yubaluna looked quietly uneasy, but said nothing. Ravel couldn't really blame her, Riser tended to react badly when gainsaid. The only reason she got away with it was because of their familial relationship. It's on your head, then, Ani-sama, Ravel said, tiredly and bluntly. But please take me seriously about treating them as an actual threat. Riser waved a dismissive hand. Clearly, every word she'd said had fallen on deaf ears, and willfully deaf ones at that. Go away, Ravel. You're boring me. He pointedly turned away from him. Yubaluna bit her lip, then turned away as well. Ravel sniffed and left the room. I don't think he's sane, Akasama. Ravel squirmed a little under her mother's considering gaze. The resemblance between them was staggering, and the younger woman knew very well how beautiful her mother was thought to be, and how many people saw those same good looks developing in her. Those good looks weren't what Reina Phoenix was best known for, though. No, that would be her intelligence. Ravel's father would have been the first to call her mother the real brains of the family. And then there was the little matter of her government job. Reina finally sighed. Something has been going on with him for a while. It started not long after he started participating in raiding games. I've been trying to backtrace when exactly it began and probable causes. She shook her head. It's been slow going, especially with matters how they are at the ministry right now. Ravel nodded glumly. She understood that part all too well. Reina was among the Leviathan's most senior advisors and often had to keep her focused on the mundane but vital minutiae of foreign affairs. It wasn't all that different than what Ravel found herself doing for Riser, except that Serafal-sama had sense enough to listen to their mother. And you're right about the position Riser's putting us in, Reina continued. Our house's wealth depends on our agreements and contracts, and if other families can't trust our word to be kept, we'll be in deep trouble. She smiled wanly. Not to mention the ethics of the situation. Can you and Otu-sama talk to him about this? Ravel said. It felt very important to her that her brother's plan be hamstring. The financial stability of her house was paramount, but the desire to see Issei remain safe was stronger than she expected. No, she told herself. It wasn't possible. A reincarnate, and an engaged one at that. She tried to push the thought aside as her mother replied. We'll speak to him tomorrow after breakfast. But I don't think you should get your hopes up. Ravel closed her eyes, letting out a frustrated sigh. But you just agreed with me. I do agree with you, Reina said. And we'll tell him to honor the agreement as witnessed. But what do you plan to do if he decides to ignore us? He wouldn't. Ravel trailed off. The way her brother was behaving, he might ignore their parents out of spite and damn the consequences. Never mind that a hefty compensation payout to the House of Sitri would be the best case scenario that came as a result. So? If you can't stop him and your father and I can't stop him, what does that leave? Reina asked, and Ravel resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Trust her mother to turn this into a teachable moment. The worst part was that it worked. There was an avenue she hadn't considered before. Akasama, can you arrange a meeting for me? She asked. Ravel kept reaching up to touch her hair. It felt more than a little strange for it not to be styled into her normal drill-like twintails, but if she was going to do this without being noticed. I'm sorry, is this seat taken? Ravel started to say yes, then stopped to regard the speaker. She was a quietly pretty woman, with wine-colored eyes behind round glasses and wavy pinkish-beige hair clubbed back into a stubby braid. She wore a gray skirt suit, a light blue blouse, and sensible black flats. Altogether, she looked like a literature teacher at a private girls' school, instead of the queen of Amayu's peerage. Behemoth-sama. Ravel said carefully, softly. That's right, Behemoth said with a nod, sitting next to Ravel at the busy lunch counter. I hope you won't mind if I eat lunch while we're here. She indicated the Monte Cristo sandwich and French onion soup on her tray. Not exactly the lunch you'd expect from a monster out of the Bible. Go right ahead. I've done the same, Ravel assured her. There were reasons she'd selected this delicatessen in downtown Lilith. Quite aside from its proximity to the main governmental offices, it had some of the best sandwiches in the underworld and thus was busy at all hours. Ravel had just polished off a Reuben of her own. After a few minutes of companionable silence, Behemoth set down the remaining half of her sandwich and turned towards the younger woman. So. What can I do for the daughter of the House of Phoenix? It's more what I can do for the House of Sitri and its heir's future husband, Ravel answered, her face solemn. What about Hyoudou-kun? Behemoth said slowly. The mood in Serafal's office was tense. You're sure she was telling the truth, Behemoth-san? Sona asked, her hands curled into fists. The other two women in the room had never seen that kind of icy fury in her eyes before, at least, not before Hyoudou had entered her life. I'm certain of it, Sona-san, her sister's queen answered. I had a truth detection spell running the entire time we spoke. It's possible she was misinformed, but she believed every word she spoke. She said Reina-sama advised her to speak to me, and I know how much Serah-sama trusts her judgment. She shook her head. What she describes is definitely characteristic of her brother, too. Ray-chan was absolutely correct. Serafal's tone was soft and serious. We should tell Iken and Riatan too. They need to know. We can't rule out his peerage deliberately targeting Iken during the match, either. Arrest him. Sona's tone matched her eyes. If a voice could freeze objects, Serafal's office would be an Arctic wasteland right now. This is premeditated murder, aimed at a member of the House of Sitri. She took a deep breath before continuing. Not to mention that it's a knowing violation of an agreement witnessed by one of the Mau. By the Lucifer, no less. I want to, Sotan, Serafal told her sister, and her voice was genuinely sympathetic. But he'll say that claim is without substance because you and Iken aren't actually married yet. Since when has that mattered? Behemoth asked. I thought the betrothed party was considered as a member of their fiancé's family unless the engagement was broken. It's a tradition, but it doesn't have the force of law, Serafal explained, shaking her head. It might be a different story if Iken had already made middle class or higher or had been born into one of the pillars, but she made a disgusted sound. There are more than enough purebred devils who want to keep the reincarnates in their place and would applaud this on general principles. She looked at her sister guiltily. It's also true that what he has in mind for Iken violates the terms of the agreement and that he'd be putting his family on the hook for it. But all that really requires is for the House of Phoenix to make proper restitution to the House of Sitri. Whatever Riser's family may think about his actions, that's a legal stance they're almost required to take. And though you have influence over what that entails. It's Otu-sama and Aka-sama who have the final say. Sona's voice was quieter now, the icy anger now replaced by pain. And, knowing Aka-sama, she'd be just as happy to be bribed to sweep it under the rug. After a moment, she added softly, I don't know what to do, Wani-sama. What can I do? The language of the agreement didn't specify which rook you were loaning Ryutan, so you could swap Iken out with Tsubasa-chan, but that's not fair to her, either. Serafal leaned back in her chair. You could make this knowledge public and try to force him to observe the terms, but the effectiveness of that would depend largely on public opinion, and Riser is petty enough to double down out of spite. She hesitated, then added, you could take Iken and run. He's the Akaji Haim's son, so Kyoto would probably be willing to give him and his fiancée shelter. Sona actually considered it for a long moment. But, in the end, she shook her head. She didn't have a choice, really. Her expression might not have been one of defeat, but she did feel decidedly disheartened. I can't do that. I have a responsibility to the rest of my peerage, to our family. She let out a long, shuddering sigh, her shoulders shaking. I know, Serafal said gently. There is, of course, one thing you can and should do. She reached out to her sister's chin, tipping it upward so she could look in her eyes. Make sure they win. Riser has weaknesses, almost all of them stemming from his personality. He's not invincible, no matter what he thinks. Sona nodded, letting out a breath. Yes. She cleared her throat, looking calmer now. To heaven with the agreement. If he's going to violate it. Quite right, Serafal agreed, smiling wanly. And, if I'll act as your rook in the retaliatory raiding game. And we'll make Riser regret the day he was born. Yes, Sona agreed. Inwardly, though, she was thinking of the one option that they hadn't mentioned. Issei becoming a stray devil. It would break her heart to never be able to be together with him again, for him to be considered a shoot-on-sight criminal in the underworld. But he would still be alive, and her sister was likely right about Kyoto being willing to shelter him. Serafal regarded her for a moment, and Sona wondered if her sister hadn't already guessed her train of thought. Instead, she said, let's go see them now. This shouldn't wait, not with the match so close. Sona and Serafal arrived just as Riaz and the others were sitting down to dinner. What they had to say soured everyone's appetite. Rio was a shen, and it wasn't clear whether she wanted to drag Issei home and hide him under the bed or to walk into the Phoenix family estate with aim no Habari drawn. Even Saji was taken aback and he gave Issei a reluctantly sympathetic look. Ria spoke first. She was brisk, as if wanting to say the words before her reluctance kicked in. Hyoudou-kun, under the circumstances, I can't ask you to act as my rook. Not when Riser is openly targeting you. That would just put Basa-chan in the line of fire, though, Issei observed glumly. He felt even more guilty for his earlier thought about the match's outcome having minimal effect on him. Sona-chan and Sarani are right, senpai. I appreciate you letting me opt out, but I can't. He glanced at Asia, who looked rather guilty herself. So we need to make sure your peerage wins, Riaz, Sona insisted. Wani-sama and I will remain here until the match, helping with strategy. Doesn't that violate the agreement? Akeno wondered. Riser's already indicated his own intention to violate it. As far as I'm concerned, he can go piss up a rope. Sona's voice was quietly angry and the mild profanity only underlined that anger. Issei reached for her hand, interlacing his fingers with his. Some of the quiet rage left her eyes and her body relaxed minutely. Not completely, though, her jaw continued to work. Even if Sotan wasn't correct, the precise language of the agreement doesn't preclude me from acting as an intermediary, Serafal pointed out. She gave Issei a sympathetic look. I'm sorry to dump this on you, Iken. But you needed to know right away. I know, Issei replied, his tone as reassuring as possible. Thank you, Sarani. Ria sighed and turned her attention to Akeno. We need to pull out all the stops. I thought we had, Saji said in confusion. Not all of them, I'm afraid. Ria's eyes were on Akeno's, and if they were fundamentally sympathetic, they were also relentless in this moment. No, Akeno said immediately. Absolutely not. Akeno, under the circumstances. No. There was an atypical note of protest, or even distress, in the queen's voice. Riaz, you can't ask that of me. I don't want to, Riaz insisted. But we need every edge we can get to pull this off, and that's the biggest one we have available. Akeno lapsed into sullen silence. What are you two talking about? Issei asked, confused. Akeno inherited her father's special ability, Sona answered, her voice now somewhat calmer. Holy lightning. It was Akeno's turn to work her jaw angrily. Holy lightning? Kaori asked. Riaz looked at her queen and sighed before answering. Akeno is half fallen angel. She regarded Issei. I trust that doesn't bother you. There was a faint but unmistakable note of it had better not in her voice. The half-dragon rook shook his head. No. I mean, if there are both good people and bad ones among devils, it makes sense that there'd be the same among fallen angels. And my folks claim to have some as friends, so he shrugged. Good, Riaz told him, nodding. Her father is one of Grigori's leaders, and he has an ability to combine photokinesis with electrokinesis. The resulting lightning is devastatingly powerful, especially against devils. She glanced guiltily at her friend and let out a sigh. Akeno has the same ability, even if not quite as refined. But it would be more than sufficient to dispose of Riser's servants. Even his queen could not stand against it for long. That's perfect, then, Issei said, perking up. What's the problem? She refuses to use it, Riaz told him with a sigh. It's his ability. Akeno's words came out as a virtual hiss. Her head was lowered in sullenness. I refuse to deal with anything that has to do with him. Her father, Sona said softly and cleared her throat. Akeno, I understand why you're reluctant, but… No. The word came out in an almost petulant tone. No. Issei repeated the word incredulously. Senpai, your freedom's at stake. Not to mention my life, which may not mean a damn thing to you, but it sure does to me. Don't mock me, Hyoudou-kun. Akeno's head snapped up, her purple eyes blazing, and she rose to her feet, an aura of electricity starting to surround her. I'm sorry you're in the crossfire, but you have no idea what you're asking of me. Yeah, okay, maybe I don't, but I know what stands a good chance of happening if I don't ask it. Issei shot back in an increasingly loud voice, springing to his feet. Blue-white sparks started dancing around his hands, not enough to bring his flames fully to life, but enough to prompt Sona to summon a sphere of water just in case. He's gonna fucking kill me, and he's gonna be a lousy, abusive husband to Ria-senpai, and he's gonna treat the rest of you like his slaves. You really want that? Do ya? The two of them glared at each other for a long moment, the tension in the room spiking uncomfortably. Both Sona and Riaz tensed, ready to act to calm their respective retainers if necessary. Remarkably, the wind left Akeno's sails first, and she slumped her shoulders. You don't understand, she said softly, brokenly. My father left my mother and I to die. I swore I'd never touch his power, not after he did that. Issei's shoulders slumped as well, and he sank back onto the couch. You're right, he said in a tone that matched Akeno's. I don't know what you've been through. I guess I can't blame you for being reluctant to use it, but maybe this once, I don't think you'd be, he shrugged helplessly. I don't know. Think of it as being the person he wasn't, saving others when he didn't. Being the better person. He sighed. I know I'm being selfish, but my life really is hanging in the balance here. Akeno snorted, but there was a trace of actual humor, albeit bitter and dark, in the sound. Well, you're not exaggerating. She looked back up. Very well. You're going to help me, though. What do I need to do? Issei asked, a wary note entering his voice. Be a moving target. Akeno's eyes bored into his, and if her usual sweetly cruel smile hadn't returned to her face, there were traces of it in her eyes. After all, you're the one who's been badgering me about this. It's only fair that you help me work on it. Issei winced inwardly. He couldn't deny it, though. It'll hurt less than what Riser has in mind for you, he reminded himself. Fine, okay. Fair enough. Sona fixed Akeno with an old-fashioned look. No permanent injuries. Asia will be standing by to keep him whole, Ria said quickly. There was quiet relief in her tone and in her face. From her place across the table, Asia nodded in agreement. Then we'll start tomorrow morning, Akeno said. Yeah, tomorrow, Issei agreed. Kaori rubbed her eyes as she walked up to the top of the hill, raising her hand in greeting to Sona and Asia. When did they start? Issei-kun got up before 7, Sona told her. She didn't look particularly pleased about the fact. They started just after breakfast. "You look tired," Asia commented, looking slightly concerned. "I am." Kaori stifled a yawn. Kiba-kun likes to start his night training before dawn, too. She checked her wristwatch. "They've been at it for 3 hours." She grimaced. "How's it going?" "Pretty much like that." Sona pointed upwards, and Kaori followed her gaze. The three of them were treated to the sight of a midnight blue Japanese dragon juking and diving its way through the sky, attempting to dodge Akeno's holy lightning. For her part, the queen was dressed in the garb of a Shinto priestess and smiled broadly as she sent bolt after bolt of blue-white lightning at Issei. He managed to dodge most of them, but not all, and the three girls winced at his half-strangled cries of pain. He endeavored to give as good as he got, but he wasn't nearly as adept with pyrokinesis in his dragon form, and Akeno was able to avoid most of his Rekadan strikes easily. Asia sighed. "I'll get ready to heal Nai-san." "I don't like how much fun Akeno-senpai seems to be having with this," Kaori muttered. "She promised no permanent injuries to Issei-kun," Sona reminded her. "And he's a rook. He can handle this." She didn't look particularly happy about it, either, though. After taking the third bolt in the center of mass, Issei began losing altitude rapidly, circling down toward Sona and the others. At about 100 meters, he reverted to human form, and all three girls winced as they saw his torso covered with scorch marks. "Fine, I suppose we can take a break," Akeno called out airily. Issei stumbled on his landing and was only saved from face-planting into the dirt by Kaori's awkward scramble to catch him. He leaned heavily against her, panting and groaning for a moment before Asia caught up with him. "Thanks," he said softly. "It's okay," Kaori replied, looking at him carefully. "Yikes. Those don't look comfortable." "Oh, they're not." The rook sank to the ground as Asia activated Twilight Healing, and the tightness in his expression began relaxing away. "Thanks, that's better." "I'm impressed, Hyoudou-kun," Akeno said breezily, alighting effortlessly nearby. "You took several solid hits and stayed airborne. I think you could give Yubaluna a run for her money." "I'd rather sit for the money right now, thanks," Issei managed with a pained chuckle. Twilight Healing was knitting away his injuries, but the holy aspect of Akeno's attack slowed its effectiveness. "Kaori-san, help me to the ground." "Yeah. Hold on," the knight said quickly, helping Issei slide gracefully onto the grass. The rook sat down gingerly, still panting, and stared up at the clouds. "I trust you're making progress," Sona said, and her tone politely told Akeno you had damned well better be. "Definitely," Akeno told her. "My aim and endurance are already improving. I think I'll only need a few more days with my workout partner here." She sent a sweet smile Issei's direction. His reaction was to groan softly and continue staring at the clouds. "That's enough for now," Sona replied, and her expression brooked no argument. "In fact, I think that's enough until after lunch." "Of course," Akeno replied graciously, inclining her head towards the Sitri heiress. "There," Asia said softly. The soft green glow from Twilight Healing faded away, and Issei sat up, rubbing his torso gingerly. The pain seemed to be completely gone from his expression, though he still looked tired. "Thanks," he said, and turned towards Akeno. "I can see why holy lightning is feared." "You should see it when I get really worked up," Akeno replied with a smirk. "You alright?" "I'll live," he groaned. "Lay down," Sona instructed him, and sat down next to him, patting her lap. Issei did so obediently, resting his head on her lap, and he started relaxing as she stroked his hair. Kaori watched him for a moment, biting her lip before sitting next to them. After a moment, she felt Akeno's eyes on the three of them. "What is it?" she asked carefully. "Nothing," Akeno lilted. She stretched. "Actually, I think that's enough progress for today. I'll be right back with some early lunch." "Thank you, senpai," Issei said, his voice sounding half asleep as Sona tousled his hair. "It's the least I can do for my adorable little cousin," the queen said in an offhand tone. Issei's eyes opened in mild surprise. He didn't move from where he was. In fact, he looked like he was debating whether or not he had the energy to move at all. "What did you just say?" "Cousin," Akeno repeated patiently. "You've been nagging me about doing what's right, but you've also been patient with me and doing what I want, and you've cared about my feelings. That sounds like being family to me." She smirked. "And if you're a Daimon, we're probably related anyway. So, cousin." "I refuse to call you One-isan Akeno," Sona said wryly. She didn't miss a beat, continuing to stroke Issei's hair. Issei didn't move. Finally, he said, his tone wary, "Himejima-senpai, I don't know what to say. Either I think of you as family, or I think of you as something else, Issei-kun," the queen warned him with a sweet smile. Kaori wondered how much of that was a joke. "Akeno ni," Issei said quickly. "Good boy." She reached down to tweak his cheek playfully, and he rolled his eyes but let her. "See? You're getting the hang of it already." Ikeno, Sona said warningly, at the same time that Kaori protested, senpai. Oh, fine, I'll stop teasing him in front of his girls, she said with a chuckle. Stop saying stuff like that, Issei muttered, his cheeks turning red. So what's going on? Kaori asked curiously. Issei and Sona had asked her to join them for a walk before dinner, and so the three of them were strolling underneath the underworld sky, watching the faux sunset. It was a tranquil scene, one that contrasted sharply with the violence that would come in a few hours. It had been a long, draining week, but it had paid off. Ria's peerage was working as a well-oiled machine now, even its temporary members. Everyone had made remarkable gains in skill and strength. Issei had even developed a new trick that might come in handy certainly, it had raised everyone's eyebrows when he demonstrated it. Perhaps most importantly, as far as tomorrow's match went anyway, both Saji and Ikeno had come a long way with their respective sacred gears and powers. Given how much of their strategy hinged on the two of them, that had to be a good sign. Because the match started at 12:01 am, Rias had given everyone the day off to relax and center themselves. Relaxed was the last thing he felt right now, though. I have a favor I want to ask of you, he told Kaori gravely. It was a strange feeling. He didn't feel fatalistic or like he was counting down his last hours, but it felt very important to get this last bit of insurance. He was staring at the possibility of death and it was staring right back and the way it felt wasn't something he could escape. Oh okay, I'm listening, she said slowly. If we lose, he began. You're not going to lose, Sona said sharply. There was something both weary and wary about her expression. He knew she wasn't happy about what he was going to ask. I know, Issei said. His tone was meant to be reassuring, but he couldn't quite manage that. But if we don't? Go on, Kaori said, feeling slightly nettled. I want you to kill me. Issei pushed the words out. With Yuzorajiri. Before Riser can. What? Kaori blurted out, her eyes wide. That was clearly the last thing she had expected to hear come out of Hyoudou Issei's mouth. If we lose, I can't run away. That would disgrace Sona-chan, he explained. And Riser's enough of a prick that he wouldn't make my death quick, either. He let out a sigh. If I'm gonna die, I'm gonna choose how I go out. No. I refuse. Kaori protested. You can't ask that of me, Ice. Yes, I can. I have to. Issei insisted. If it all goes wrong, I don't want Riser to do what he plans to do. The only way to avoid it, without getting Sona-chan or anyone else in trouble, is for me to die first. You're the only one I can trust to do it quickly and relatively painlessly. Kaori lapsed into sullen silence, her eyes betraying inner turmoil. Issei turned back toward Sona. Sona-chan. I don't want it, she said, her voice thick with quiet anger. I don't want it, Issei-kun. I'd rather you have it than Riser, he persisted. You'd put unknown dictator to good use. He just wants it for a fucking trophy. He grabbed Sona's hands and squeezed them hard. Please. Sona closed her eyes and nodded sharply. She then said, her tone still quietly angry, this is all hypothetical, though. You are going to win tomorrow, and you are going to live. I'll do it under one condition. Kaori spoke up and her tone snagged Issei's attention. Marry me. After we win tomorrow, make me your next fiancé. Issei's eyes widened and he stared at her, confusion and desire writ plain on his face. What? I love you, Ice. Kaori's expression was odd as she said the words aloud for the first time, as if she were testing how they tasted on her lips. Her cheeks were burning, but her voice was steady. I want to be one of your wives, she continued. And if I do it now, I'll be the second senior wife. Right, Kaichu. Yes, Sona said promptly. I really wish you'd done this earlier, Kaori. Issei spun toward Sona, staring at her in shock. You knew. One of the first things I did was discuss this with the girls in my peerage who I thought it likely that you'd develop a mutual attraction with, his fiancé well, now, senior fiancé answered in a matter-of-fact tone. That tone shifted to affectionate exasperation as she added, honestly, I told you that you might be surprised how soon a harem might come together. And that you had the same blind spots Kiba-kun does when it comes to sensing someone's attraction to you. Everyone knows. He blurted out, blushing. Everyone who's relevant to the matter, Sona answered. I'm sure that if you think about it, you'll figure out just who they are. She cleared her throat. I've been getting after Kaori about this ever since you two were reincarnated. Kaori-san. Issei trailed off, gulping. Just Kaori. She hesitated, then added, I've been wanting to say that since the day I found out you were a dragon. So you actually have feelings for me? Issei tried to suppress the delight in his voice, tried to be respectful toward Sona. It wasn't taking. Yes, damn it. Kaori's voice was less steady now, and her cheeks were the same shade as Ria's hair. It's not recent, either. Since middle school. I love you. Her eyes remained steady, and they continued to bore into his. And I know you feel the same, Ice. I'm not blind. Neither is Sona Kaichu. Okay, he said softly, his face cherry red. He cleared his throat. Yeah. Yeah, Kaori, I do. I like you a lot. Ever since junior high. If I am not already in love with you, it's just a matter of time. Please marry me. Be my wife. Sona nodded in agreement. Yes. Please, Kaori. Kaori nodded jerkily and walked forward, throwing her arms around both of them. The three of them clung together for several minutes before Kaori turned her attention fully to Issei. The kiss she planted on him left the rook gasping for breath. You are going to stay alive tomorrow, she told him fiercely. None of this if I die bullshit. If something happens, it happens, but don't you dare lay down and die tomorrow. Sona said nothing, but it was clear from her expression that she fully agreed. I promise. I'll fight tooth and nail, Issei said softly. I mean it, Kaori insisted, a relentless look in her eyes. Remember what you told me the night we fought Selzen. Well, I want you to stay alive too. As do I. Sona's voice might have lacked Kaori's fire, but Issei knew how to sense the depths of emotion on her control. And the unyielding note of command. He really was whipped, he couldn't help thinking with a wry smile. And he wouldn't have it any other way if it meant being with them. I promise, he repeated. We'll win. And I'll stay alive. So, will you two tell me what happened? Sona broke the companionable silence some time later. The three of them sat together on the villa's deck on a cushioned bench after dinner, a blanket wrapped around them to ward off the evening chill. Cocoa cooled on the table in front of them, but was mostly ignored in favor of snuggling together. That came easily enough to Issei and Sona, but they had been surprised how easily Kaori was adjusting to it. What do you mean? Issei asked. The thing that made Kaori hate you. Or that you thought had made her hate you, Sona elaborated. What? Kaori looked perplexed. I'd never hated Ice. There was just Her expression cleared. That. I never hated you, Ice. I was disappointed and mad, but. That seemed like hate to me, Issei said ruefully. What happened? Sona asked again. It was third year of middle school, Issei told her. Mitsuda and Motohama had found a new place to peep and wanted me to come along. They wanted me to copy their photos and videos to my laptop. He closed his eyes. It felt like he was going to die from sheer chagrin and had a feeling that he looked like it. They knew I had a thing for Kaori and that we'd been flirting. They dangled the idea of seeing her naked in front of me. It was their idea, wasn't it? Mitsuda and Motohama. Yeah, but I went along with it, Issei said. I wanted to see you naked, it was all I'd been thinking about around then. He shook his head. It was only when we got there that it occurred to me that it was a violation of your privacy, that it'd hurt you. I wasn't exactly quiet in trying to get them to leave, and they weren't quiet in protesting, and that was when you guys saw us. I would have believed you, you know, Kaori said softly. If you'd come and told me that you changed your mind, that you were trying to fix things, I would have believed it. I know that now. I just couldn't then. That look of disappointment in your eyes, it felt like it'd kill me. I felt like the only thing I could do to make it up to you was giving you space. We're a couple of idiots, aren't we? Yeah, we are. But we're here now, at least, thanks to Sona-chan. Yeah, we are. A mischievous smile crossed Kaori's face. Her eyes shifted to meet Sona's, and something passed between them. Issei wasn't quite sure what was being silently communicated, but there seemed no hostility or resentment in it. We're all fortunate, Sona said finally, and nestled closer to Issei. Kaori did the same on his left side. Sona-san. Kaori had waited until Issei's breathing had evened out into sleep to speak again. She suspected Sona was still awake, though. Yes. Sona's tone was unsurprised. You aren't really gonna let Ice die. Are you? Kaori was certain that their king didn't want him to die, but if she felt her hands were tied by devil law, she wasn't sure how she was going to be able to handle that. I certainly don't want to, Sona said, her voice slightly pained. I'm not in a position with a lot of wiggle room, though. It's very important that you play the part Issei-kun asked you to, if it comes to that. Kaori raised both eyebrows and sat up just enough so that she could see her fellow fiancé over Issei's sleeping bulk. You're planning something. Try not to let it come to that, Sona said, a touch of resigned humor entering her voice. It will open an entirely new can of worms. You'll be alive, though, Kaori replied softly. I can deal with the rest. Sona looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, a faint but approving smile ghosting across her lips. You might have to take the lead on that for a while, if we reach that point. As I said, please try and keep it from coming up. Don't worry, the knight promised. I'll take care of our boy. She reached out a hand, and Sona took it. The two of them relaxed again, Issei unconscious between them. They were still like that, half drowsing, when Rias came to get them. The mood in the student council office was tense but anticipatory. Issei, Kaori, and Saji had put in an appearance to bid their peerage mates farewell and receive their well wishes. Saji was saying goodbye to Haruko and Momo, and the way that he looked at them indicated that he was actually noticing their flirtations. Issei wondered if he really been that blind too, as he bid his friends farewell. Or just afraid to admit what he wanted. Certainly, Tsubasa's bone-crushing hug seemed to linger, and Rya actually kissed him on the cheek. Aika had settled for a tight hug and a sober benediction to kick Riser's ass. Her expression and eyes had been completely free of her trademark sang-froid, and he had a distinct feeling that she wanted to keep him in the embrace. This definitely needed exploration when, damn it, he returned. As the girls bid Kaori farewell, Issei exchanged embraces with his parents, then a handclasp with Tsubaki, before finally turning to Sona. The Sitri heiress pulled him into a hug that was even more bone-crushing than Tsubasa's. "I love you," he murmured to Sona, returning the tight hug. "I love you, too." Sona gave him a lingering kiss and shifted her gaze towards Kaori. It was hard to define all the emotions present in that gaze, but not a one of them was negative or even jealous. "Take care of our boy, Kaori." "I will, Sona-san." After a moment, the two of them hugged briefly, and as they released each other, Kaori extended a hand to Issei. "Let's go." "Yeah." Issei took it. "My name is Grafia Lucifuge," a firm female voice spoke over the broadcast circle. "I have the privilege of refereeing this rating game between the peerages of Ria's Gremory and Riser Phoenix." Ravel tried not to glower at her brother. It was difficult, he was smiling unpleasantly as he listened to Grafia speak. He wasn't sure whether he was fantasizing about Ria's or her, and in either event it was terribly gauche right at the moment. "This is Sona Sitri, Princess Designate of the House of Sitri. My peerage will be responsible for the broadcast of this match," another woman said coolly over the broadcast circle. Ravel had to admire Sona's calmness, especially given the circumstances. There was a brief pause, then Sona added, "Pause broadcast. This is for the match's participants only." There was another pause, and then Sona resumed speaking, her tone sharp. "Riser, I know about your plans for if you win." Riser's lazy smile immediately became a scowl. "I'll warn you this once. Don't. If you do, you'll have earned the enmity of the House of Sitri. And remember our element. No flame can resist the waters of Sitri forever." Her voice was as cold as the Arctic. Ravel had to suppress a wince. That wasn't even a subtle threat, and she knew how easily Sona Sitri could embody the word implacable. Isabella and Mihi caught her suddenly pinched expression, and they didn't look particularly reassured themselves. In fact, the only members of the peerage who didn't look at least a little concerned were Isle, Nell, and Riser himself. The twins were pretty dull-witted and easily bored when it came to anything beyond mindless carnage. As for Riser, his scowl just deepened. There was no sign of concern or trepidation in his expression, though. Rather, he looked like a spoiled bully who'd been scolded for picking on a smaller child. "That bitch needs bringing to heel," he said sullenly. Ravel just shook her head. Next, he would probably proclaim himself the sole Mayu and demand Surziches and the others cede their offices to him. "The broadcast will resume now," Sona said, her tone now perfectly level again. "Nicely said, Sona," Ria said approvingly. Issei and Kaori nodded firmly in agreement. Ria's peerage, both permanent members and temporary ones, gathered in the Orc clubhouse. The only one absent was Gasper, whose hikikomori condition was apparently so pronounced that he couldn't leave his room for even something like this. Ria's herself wore her school uniform, as did Kiba and Kaneko. Akeno wore the robes of a Maiko, which was something of an odd clash with her personality. Asia wore her Grasshopper robes and had over a tidy A-line dress. Saji wore black jeans and a green sweatshirt. Issei wore a red polo shirt and blue jeans, with two improvised bandoliers full of roofing nail bundles crisscrossing his chest. Kaori wore her kendo gear, sans helmet, and had Yuzorigiri thrust through the waistband, scabbard turned edge up, aka samurai style. The latter three wore white silk armbands that had both the Gremory and Sitri crests carefully inked onto them. Issei and Kaori clutched each other's hand, their fingers interlaced. "I never knew Sona could be so intense," Akeno mused. "Issei-kun, you've been holding out on us all this time." Issei reddened slightly. "People keep insisting on thinking of her as some frigid librarian or something. I've never understood why. And that is probably why you bring out that intensity in her," Ria said with a smile. "The match will begin in 1 minute," Grafia's voice announced over the speaker circle. "Please take this time to make final preparations." At 12:01, everyone in the room tensed. Nothing happened. Did they glitch? Issei wondered aloud. "Ice, the window," Kaori said, pointing outside. He looked and his eyes widened, then narrowed, as he saw the sky. That definitely wasn't the sky over Kuo. "So they're using the school as the battleground," he said aloud. "More or less," Riaz agreed. "It's been perfectly replicated in the game field." She opened a desk drawer, pulling out a box of strawberry Pocky. "Even down to the Pocky I keep in the drawer." "Indeed," Grafia's voice rang out over the speaker circle. The battleground for this raiding game is the campus of Kuo Academy. As she spoke, Akeno and Kiba pulled the campus map off the wall, spreading it out on Ria's desk. Ria-sama, your base is the Orc Clubhouse. Riser-sama, yours is the Academy Headmaster's office. Home field advantage, sort of, Kiba said softly. It's the sort of that could bite us, Hyoudou-kun, Rias pointed out gently. But yes. Let's make the most of what we have. She began distributing small glowing red orbs, about the size of tiny marbles. These will work like a Bluetooth headset. I think you know the drill by now. Issei nodded and he and his peerage mates tucked the orbs into their ears. Rias reached into a drawer and pulled out some pushpins, stabbing a red one down on the Orc Clubhouse and a yellow one down on the headmaster's office. They'll be pushing towards here to force me into checkmate. We'll be doing the same to him. What's the strategy, Butchu? Akeno asked. We're almost equal in numbers and skills-wise we're probably superior. Rias nodded. If he's performing true to form, he'll be sending sorties out. Mostly pawns, maybe backstopped by a knight or rook. We'll draw them into the clubhouse area and take them out, then go on the offensive. As the others nodded, she stood. Hyoudou-kun, Mireama-san, take up position in the gym. That's the likeliest place for them to try and penetrate. Yes, senpai, Kaori said promptly, and Issei nodded in agreement. Hyoudou-kun, Kaneko-chan, start laying traps in the forest. Asia, I'd like you to go with them and use illusion magic to obscure the three of you, Ria said next. Yes, but you, Kiba said. At the same time, Asia replied, yes, Ria-san, and Kaneko nodded minutely. The Grimoire heiress thought for a moment, then added, Saji-kun, stay here with me for the moment. You're the key to the endgame, so we need you out of harm's way for the moment. Wherever you need me, senpai, Saji said immediately, nodding firmly. Akeno, I want you outside on eye in the sky duty. Keep as low a profile as possible, but stay ready to respond if anything gets past our Rook Knight teams, Ria said finally. Try to keep your Holy Lightning in reserve, but if Yubeluna puts in an appearance, you can take her out. As you like, Rias, Akeno said smoothly, smiling at the thought of crossing swords with her opposite number. Hyoudou-kun, get your little surprise ready, Rias added. I'll give you the word when to spring it. Roger that, senpai, Issei replied, giving her a mock salute. Ria smiled. All the work you guys have put in this week, I'm proud of you. Let's give them hell. She nodded sharply, slipping into her king's persona. Move out. Right. Her peerage, both permanent and temporary, chorused, and they left the office with a purposeful stride. Not a bit of subtlety to them, is there? Kaori complained quietly. She and Issei peered around the gym's doorframe, making sure to stay out of sight. 4 of Riser's servants had entered the gym. The 2 crazy Chinsei wielders in gym shorts, the Chinese girl in a blue kippao, and a blue-haired girl in abbreviated Japanese clothing who carried a bow. Of the 4 of them, the Chinese girl was the only one who seemed alert. Not a bit, Issei agreed. He held a hand up to the ear that had the orb in it. It was an unnecessary gesture, he knew, but it was automatic. Senpai, this is Hyoudou. We have eyes on 4 enemies, 3 pawns and a rook. Understood, Ria's voice replied calmly in his ear. A moment later, Asia spoke. She spoke in a hushed tone, as if afraid of being overheard. Ria-san, our traps are set. We have visual confirmation of 3 enemies, all of them pawns. They're 70 meters from our first line of traps. Understood, Rias repeated. Do you have an ADA for them hitting the traps? Kiba spoke up in reply. At the rate they're moving, but 2 minutes. They don't seem all that alert, but it could be an act. Neither do ours, Issei put in. Well, the rook is trying, but the others don't seem very serious about it. No sign of any other movement towards our base, Akeno reported, her tone slightly disappointed. Alright. Rias was silent for a moment. Hyoudou-kun, let us know when they're about to hit the traps. Hyoudou-kun, drop the hammer the moment he speaks. Yes, but you, Kiba replied. At the same time, Issei answered, you got it. The seconds ticked by, tension thickening with each moment. By the time 1 minute had passed, Issei was trembling, a fact he didn't realize until he felt Kaori's hand squeezing his. She offered him a reassuring smile, and he returned it. Finally, Kiba spoke. His voice was just a little higher pitched than normal, reflecting the stress he had to be feeling. They're right on top of them. Hyoudou-kun, Rias began to say, but Issei was already acting. He reached out mentally. He'd been inside Riser's phone before, and the high-class devil's idea of device security was a fucking joke. Especially, he thought wryly, to someone whose sacred gear was capable of manipulating electronics. He'd already downloaded the song, so all he had to do was max the volume, set it to single loop, and hit play. The drumstick smacked a cowbell 4 times before slamming down on a snare drum, and then the aggressive guitar and synths kicked in. Riser Phoenix literally fell over as the music started blaring out of nowhere. Oh! Rias shouted. Wait, Grafia said, her brow furrowing slightly. Is this? Everyone's watching to see what you will do. Everyone's looking at you, oh. It is, she finished, her expression caught somewhere between amazement and exasperation. Oh, hey, this song. Surzicha said brightly, starting to tap his fingers on the table to the bass line. Sona smiled fiercely. The expression would surprised, even shocked, those who didn't know her well. The rest of her peerage looked pleased, if a little nonplussed. Grafia took quiet note of the ones who looked most pleased. Those three girls also looked amused and slightly possessive. It was a look that was present, albeit subtler, on Sona's face. Right. Kiba rapped out, and he and Kaneko moved out of hiding. At the same time, Asia quietly energized the traps, and sounds of feminine outrage sudden echoed in the pseudo-night. The carefully obscured magical circles used a combination of geokinesis and aerokinesis to immobilize their victims. They weren't particularly strong traps, experienced pawns such as risers could probably dispel them with a few minutes' effort. But that few minutes was all Kiba and Kaneko needed. Kiba had to hand it to the girls, they didn't just sit there and wait. As soon as he and Kaneko appeared, the maid with light brown hair Marion, he thought he recalled from the briefing screamed promotion. Bishop. And summoned a dozen magical circles. They began spitting black-purple bursts of demonic energy. Meanwhile, the other two began working frantically to dispel their traps. Kiba lunged forward, darting in and out of the treeline. Meanwhile Kaneko juked and weaved her way out from Marion's magical blasts, making sure to keep her attention. The pawn had some skill as a ranged combatant, Kiba had to admit, but she had a lot to learn about an actual fight. Like situational awareness, for one thing. Marion screamed as he darted out of the trees a last time, appearing behind her. His holy eraser made short work of her, and a brief flash of light swept her away. The next pawn, retired. Grafia's voice was carefully neutral, but there was little doubt which side she was actually rooting for. Kiba and Kaneko turned in unison to face the remaining pawns. Behind them, Asia revealed herself, a gale arrow already knocked and aimed. Sharia fixed her face into a determined look. It almost worked, not that it would have mattered much to her opponents. It would seem that you have us at a disadvantage, she said, making an admirable effort to keep her voice from quavering. Again, she almost succeeded. Again, it made zero difference. We'll accept your surrender now, Kiba said, his voice gentle. That did not detract from the way he worked holy eraser's blade back and forth in tight, menacing circles. Please. Sharia's lips began trembling, and her knees buckled. She stayed on her feet, but only just. I surrender, she murmured in a barely audible voice, and a teleportation spell whisked her away. Phoenix pawn, retired, rang out a moment later. Well, I won't. Burant huffed, then called out, promotion. She never completed the word, as Kaneko's fist sent her to her knees. A spin kick connected with her head before she could even begin to stand back up. With a rook strength behind Kaneko's kick, she was unconscious before she went prone. Phoenix pawn, retired. Well done, Kiba told his peerage mate with a smile. She nodded back tersely. Are you all right back there, Asia-san? Just fine, Asia replied, letting her aerokinetic bow dissipate. Her expression tensed for a moment, and then she added, I don't believe anyone else is approaching. Kiba nodded his thanks. Let's catch up with the others, Kaneko said flatly, and they hurried off towards the next checkpoint. Everyone's wondering, will you come out tonight? Everyone's trying to get it right. On it. Kaori replied, and Issei called up his electrokinesis, a bundle of roofing nails starting to rotate around each hand. They stepped through the double doors, all their focus on Shulin. They'd had several minutes to come to that conclusion. The rook was both the most alert and the most capable of Riser's servants present. That made her the priority target. Lethality in a raiding game context had been something they'd discussed during the week of training. The game field infrastructure incorporated a teleportation system to remove participants who were unconscious and/or fatally wounded, and magic and healers were standing by to treat everyone thusly retired. As a result, the mortality rate in raiding games was generally minuscule. This meant that some peerages took a scorched earth approach to their tactics. As a rule, Riaz didn't like taking that tack. Nor did the rest of her peerage, including the temporary members. But the current circumstances didn't allow them to keep it off the table. She had to go down first, and that meant hitting her as hard as possible. Shulin whipped around in surprise as Issei began firing at her. She was unusually nimble for a rook and managed to dodge the first railgun attack, but the second one tore right through her center of mass, blowing her back into the wall with enough force to leave a crater. The wounds were gaping and grievous, and it was only her rook piece that kept her on her feet. Gasping in pain, she gritted her teeth and tried to throw herself at him, but Issei was already shouting railgun. Again. The next double strike punched through her torso again, painting the floor and wall with her blood. She slid to the ground, groaning a surrender, and a column of light appeared around her. When it faded, she was gone. Phoenix Rook, retired, Graphia's voice announced. Her tone was faintly stunned. Shulani. Isle screamed. You're dead, you asshole. Nell yelled, and she and her sister raised their chainsaws. White-hot flames suddenly erupted around the cutting edges, and they charged at Issei. Back off. Issei roared, stepping into their path. He yanked mentally, miming the action with his hands, and the chainsaws lurched out of the twins' hands, flying towards the half-dragon Rook. They came to a hovering stop in front of him and abruptly caught fire, twisting together in a mangled mechanical slipknot. Isle and Nell stared in dismay and shock. Issei mimed tossing the Rekage to the side and it went slamming into the gym wall. It hit with an explosion, leaving the wall with a brand new window. Kaori raised one eyebrow. Now would you two fucking back off, Issei snarled, forming his hands into finger guns and pointing them at the twin pawns. The hands wreathed themselves in blue-white flame, clearly poised to unleash a Rekadan flurry upon the two sisters. Nothing like driving a point home. Hey, calm him down or something. Nell yelled at Kaori, her voice quavering. Kaori looked back steadily. You do realize that your master plans to kill him and take his sacred gear if we lose, right? Yeah, so? Nell retorted. He deserves it for what he just did. Wouldn't she have done the same to him? Kaori countered. Yeah. The twins chorused indignantly, completely missing or ignoring the irony. And you don't even care. Kaori shook her head. No. I won't calm him down. Fine, assholes. Be like that. I'll whined and then shouted, I resign. Jerk, she vanished. I resign, too, Nell said glumly. She fixed Issei and Kaori with a venomous glare as she vanished. Phoenix Pawn, retired. Phoenix Pawn, retired, Graphia announced. Her tone was calmer now, the reaction of shock at Shulin's rapid dispatch having passed. Well, you scared a couple of middle schoolers to death. Kaori observed dryly. Smooth. Did they look like they'd listened to sweet reason? He retorted. His tone showed that he was only now starting to calm down. Not particularly, no, she admitted, giving him a brief look of concern. The two of them turned towards Mira, eyebrows raised. Issei aimed both finger guns at her. The last pawn gulped but stood her ground, raising her bow to a guard position. I'm not afraid of you two. You should be, Kaori told her. Wait, but you're over there. Yeah, and your shadow's right next to you, the Kondoka said darkly, and she suddenly vanished. Shizuku hadn't been kidding when she said that Yuzorajiri gave its bearer umbrakinesis. Kaori had spent the last 6 days working hard at increasing her control over shadows. Not only had her skill with the projected shadow blade technique improved, but she had also gained the ability to use shadows to traverse short distances. The distance from the double doors to Mira's back was well within her range. The pawn was just starting to turn when Kaori ripped Yuzorajiri from its sheath in a brutal Iaijutsu draw. Mira staggered from the impact, gasping in agony from being struck with a true holy sword, and fell face first on the gym floor. Her unconscious form flickered and vanished with a flare of light. Phoenix Pawn, retired, Graphia said. I think you enjoyed that a little too much, Kaori, Issei noted. I'm just being pragmatic. Kaori sheathed Yuzorajiri and poked Issei in the chest. And we're fighting to keep you alive, too. Don't forget that. Oh, believe me, I haven't, he told her feelingly. She touched his face, looking critically at him, the concern behind her expression apparent. Got it out of your system? Think so, he said, smiling wanly. Let's move. She nodded and the two of them sprinted for the door. Everybody's working for the weekend. Everybody wants a little romance. Shut off. Shut off, damn it. Riser thundered, jabbing his fingertips at his smartphone screen. The music player controls resisted him, the screen serenely refusing to acknowledge that it was being manipulated. Ani-sama, Ravel began, but her brother waved her off dismissively. He continued to tap furiously at the unresponsive phone. She rolled her eyes, letting out a sigh of irritation. Of all the times to become fixated on his phone, even if it was acting weird. It was. It was almost as if someone had known he'd react like that and planned accordingly. Issei-san did this, she realized. And if he didn't think of it, I'm sure Sona-san or Ria-san would have. She opened her mouth to speak again, but closed it after a moment. The thought that Riser had earned this was one that she couldn't escape or dispute. Besides, this song was kind of catchy. Ria's clenched her fists. It was a good start for certain. Not that she was stupid enough to say that aloud and tempt the fates. Everybody's going off the deep end. Everybody needs a second chance, oh. Kaori was the one to catch the flash of light in the sky. She tackled Issei, knocking them back just before the massive explosion cratered the ground in front of them. I see they didn't put up much of a fight for you, Yubaluna commented as they rose to their feet. A pity. Is it so hard for anyone from your peerage to admit that we might actually be skilled? Kaori snapped indignantly. I'm willing enough to admit that, Yubaluna replied, much to their surprise. Even if the pawns aren't that strong, Shulin is a capable rook. Besting her would take skill. But it'll be all for naught in the end. Fire began to dance around Riser's queen, and she raised her hands. I'll make this quick. You've earned that. My. I think you've earned a little something, too. Akeno's sweet voice came out of nowhere. So did the massive bolt of blue-white lightning. It smacked Eubeluna in the center of mass, and she shrieked as if someone had held her arm to a red-hot stove. Even though the bolt flew well wide of them, Issei and Kaori could still feel the unpleasant tingle that devils felt from such a powerful holy aspected attack. Eubeluna blurted it out as Akeno flew into view. Somehow, she managed to stay airborne, despite her entire body crackling with the aftereffects of a holy lightning strike. It was clearly a near thing, though, and it would be a lie to call her unscathed. Akeno was dressed in her Miko robes, but her magic was far different from normal. The blue-white crackle of holy lightning, further focused and empowered by Storm Dancer, surrounded her like a glowing azure sphere. She waggled her finger at Eubeluna, as if she were a teacher correcting a student. No. I'm your opponent. She glanced at her teammates. Issei-kun, Kaori-san, please hurry. Her smile turned wicked. I've been wanting to play with my opposite number here. Make sure to meet us at the end, Akeno ni. Issei cried out. We can't do this without you. The two of them sprinted away. How could I possibly let down my adorable cowhide and my favorite cousin? Akeno's smile turned into a smirk. Well, Bomb Queen. Does that describe your power or your talent as an actress? Show me. You want a piece of my heart? You better start from the start. You want to be in the show? Come on, baby, let's go. There. Riser cursed, hurling the phone to the ground. The expensive device impacted with enough force to shatter. Making a grunt of satisfaction, he turned his attention back to the status display and stared in shock. 6 of his pawns and 1 of his rooks, down for the count already. Imbeciles. I'll strip them of their pieces and replace them with girls who are actually competent. Letting Ria's mismatched rabble. Eubeluna's marker on the display blinked, changing from green to red. A moment later, Graphia's elegant voice announced, Phoenix Queen, retired. Riser stumbled backwards in shock. That was impossible. Eubeluna stared at the shattered remains of a tiny vial. They lay upon the ground, having been snapped away from her grasp by a pinpoint-accurate bolt of lightning. She clearly hadn't been expecting Akeno to be so precise. As if we weren't aware that Riser Phoenix's peerage would use Phoenix tears, the Gremory Queen said in a disappointed voice. Honestly. After all the time we spent researching you, planning to counter you, couldn't you have put in at least a little effort to do the same? The Gremory Queen was feeling somewhat winded, and the intensity of the holy lightning she was wreathed in had faded. But it was still extant, and she was still mostly intact. Neither could be said for Eubeluna at present. Retire, now. Akeno's expression and voice were almost sympathetic. Believe me. You'll hurt a lot worse if you don't. Riser-sama won't like this, Eubeluna said softly. We wouldn't like being under his heel, Akeno replied, her expression hardening. Is that a no? No. I surrender, Eubeluna announced, looking defeated. The teleportation spell whisked her away, and Akeno let out a sigh of relief, letting her magic dissipate. That was one major obstacle cleared, but the main event was ahead. She needed to conserve as much energy as she could. Phoenix Queen, retired, Graphia announced. Her voice was tinged with hopeful disbelief. Sona's eyes were fixed on the display. She held Issei's uniform blazer in her lap and clutched it almost like a child would clutch a security blanket. A hand touched her shoulder and she started, jerking around to glare at whoever dared touch her. She relaxed as she saw Tsubasa. The rook's expression was equally intent, with a brittle calm, and her azure eyes were fixed on the match too. Sona felt a spike of chagrin for having forgotten that she wasn't the only one whose heart was in her throat at this very moment. A moment later, she realized that Aika and Ria were also watching intently. The bishop's hands were twisting and crumpling the pleats of her skirt while the pawn was playing idly with one braid. Well, it might have started as idly. By now, she had actually unraveled the braid without realizing it. The resulting look was surprisingly fetching. Sona waved them over, turning her attention back to the match. After a moment, she felt 2 more hands resting on her shoulders and closed her eyes. It was strangely soothing. Go, Ikun, she heard Ria whisper. Indeed, she agreed. Go, Issei-kun. Incompetence. Riser thundered. He stormed back and forth in the office, his phoenix fire surrounding him like an aura. From time to time, he would snatch something off the table or desk and hurl it at the wall. Ravel found the demonstration more reminiscent of a toddler throwing a tantrum than something actually threatening, but she knew she was in a relatively privileged position. The rest of her brother's peerage wasn't, and the ones who weren't outright cringing away had subtly scooted back. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Isabella and Mihi subtly orienting on each other, as if to come to each other's rescue if needed. Riser, she knew, was too self-absorbed to have noticed their relationship, and she had no intention of informing him. After all, it was increasingly likely that his ego would probably not tolerate them loving anyone but him, and they would probably suffer for it. Riser whirled and pinned Ravel with a glare. "You. Take the rest and occupy this zone." He stabbed his finger down at the map, indicating the most direct route between the two bases. Since Ria's rabble took out the incompetents, they're probably feeling all high and mighty. They'll think they can sweep in and take us quickly. Disabuse them of the notion. Ravel looked stonily at him for a long moment, wondering if he knew how he sounded. Finally, she shrugged. A frontal confrontation. Riser sneered. "If you want to fancy it up, go ahead. What they've accomplished comes more from Eubuluna's failure than from whatever talents they may have. I'm sure you can handle whatever they want to throw at you." "Very well." Ravel looked at Isabella. "Isabella-san, please take Mihi-san and Sira-san and conceal yourself along their approach before circling around to seal off their retreat." Isabella nodded. "Yes, Ravel-sama." Her eyes shifted towards Mihi and Carloman, and the three of them left the office quickly. "Carloman-san, Nai-san, Lee-san, please come with me," she continued. "We'll meet them head-on and hit them at the same time as the others." "Agreed, Ravel-sama," the knight said firmly. The pawns grinned, clearly spoiling for a fight. Ravel smiled thinly and led them from the room. At least this would make what she had planned easier to carry out. She didn't particularly care how Riser felt about it, but she'd rather not see her peerage mate suffer. "They're being subtler than I expected," Asia reported. She was using a perception enhancement spell and was observing the far end of the approach to Riser's base. "That may be Ravel-san at work. I only see her, one of the knights, and the two remaining pawns." "Yes, I suppose Riser would be using her as his second-in-command with Eubuluna down," Riaz mused. The communication circles had been switched to conference call mode, the better to coordinate the next stage. "That's still his other bishop, knight, and rook missing. There's no sign of them." "None," Asia replied. "The spell I'm using is tuned for magical detection, so I'd be able to tell if they were using a cloaking spell." "Thank you," the Grimoire era said, and was silent for a long moment as she thought. Finally, she asked, "Any thoughts?" "At a guess, I'm pretty sure Riser's expecting us to take the obvious passage and be surprised by an interception," Akeno posited. "The missing pieces are probably Ravel's idea to try and pincer us." "Not too bad." There was a smile in her queen's voice. "It'd be a shame to disappoint them." "It's the most direct route, but there are a few others," Issei pointed out. "It depends on how patient you want to be, senpai." Riaz considered that. "You're right, but it's his patience I'm worried about. We need to avoid him reacting unpredictably, at least for as long as we can." She made a soft thoughtful sound. "It looks like we're in a good position for stand." "I can't believe you went with that name," Issei snorted in wry amusement. He didn't disagree, though. They had kicked around the idea of letting a detachment draw out his remaining pieces and having Ria's magicians, namely, Asia and Akeno, take them out in a ranged attack. It wasn't something that they'd counted on, but they'd trained for it, and so far they were in a position that exceeded their most optimistic projections. Issei wasn't particularly happy about being the decoy force, but that was status quo for a rook, and it was one giant step closer to shutting down Riser. "You're the one who suggested it," she teased him good-naturedly. "Do you concur?" "Yeah, I think so," Issei replied. "This is about the best-case scenario for it." "Agreed." Akeno was completely free of doubts. "Hyoudou-kun, Hyoudou-kun, Kaneko-chan, you've probably already guessed, but you'll be the detached force. Do everything you can to avoid acting before all of his remaining peerage have revealed themselves, but your well-being is paramount. If you feel you need to engage." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. "Yes, but you," Kiba and Kaneko chorused, and Issei nodded before adding, "Yes, senpai." "Saji-kun, I want you and Murayama-san to wait until they're engaged before making your way to Riser's base by one of the other routes. If necessary, Saji-kun, go ahead and promote. Once you're there, take cover and wait for the others to catch up." "Yes, senpai," the pawn and knight chorused. "Asia, Akeno, you know your roles. Get ready." Ria smiled. She knew they couldn't see it, but she hoped they heard it in her voice. "I'm very proud of you, everyone. You've done so well today. I just need a little more." She let the praise sink in, and then, in her king's voice, ordered, "Move out." "Right." Her peerage, both permanent members and temporary ones, said in unison. It was a fine line to walk, Issei thought. They had to make it clear that they were taking the most obvious route. At the same time, though, they couldn't be too obvious about it. Riser might have his head up his ass, but there was altogether too good a chance that Ravel would sense something was up. And so the three of them had to move furtively down through the schoolyard, darting from notional cover to cover, putting on the airs of a group trying desperately to reach their objective before fortune caught up with them. As a result, it was nearly a relief when they were pincered. Truth be told, his patience was starting to fray, especially without Kaori's soothing presence. The group led by Ravel was waiting at the approach to Riser's base. The Phoenix daughter herself wore a solemn, determined expression, and Issei wasn't really sure what she thought about the whole situation. He knew that she was at least opposed to the part that involved him getting killed, which was good. The rest of it, though? He heard Kiba draw in a slow breath behind him and the soft sound of subtly muffled footsteps. That would be the second group, the ones intended to seal off their retreat. The brown-haired knight stepped forward, declaring, "My name is..." "Parliament-san," Issei interrupted, his tone sharp. "I know who all of you are. I'm afraid I don't particularly care right now. Get out of our way." He knew his response wasn't particularly polite, but to hell with it, it wasn't their lives on the line, after all now. He tensed, and two bundles of roofing nails broke loose from his bandoliers and started rotating around his hands, while electrokinesis skipped up and down his forearms. Parliament looked especially stunned by Issei's curt response. Her mouth opened and closed several times as she tried to find a proper response. "Normally, I would apologize for my friend's attitude," Kiba said gravely. "But under the circumstances, I think he has good reason to be irritable." "I know," Isabella said, stepping into Issei's line of sight. Her tone was genuinely apologetic. "Issei-san, I'm sorry. If I had any control over this..." "I don't blame you, Isabella-san," Issei said tersely, forcing himself back to politeness. Isabella deserved that much, at least. "Any of you. Just your asshole of a master. So I'll give you all one chance to walk away now. After that, I won't hold back." Azure flames suddenly cloaked him like an overcoat, enough so that his friends winced and pulled slightly away from him. Isabella winced as well, taking a step back. She shook her head, opening her mouth to respectfully decline. "I'll walk away." All eyes shifted to Ravel, who wore a solemn expression. More than that, she looked as though she'd already decided to do this before Issei had even made the offer. She spoke slowly and clearly, as if her words were being broadcast across the underworld. Which, for all Issei really knew, might actually be the case. Ani-sama is being a fool and placing the house at risk. I won't support him in that any longer. Easy for you to say, Ravel-sama. Cirrus protested. You have options. But the rest of us are obligated to follow Riser-sama's orders. I plan to ask Aka-sama to trade for me, Ravel explained. Any of you who wish me to ask the same on your behalf, I will. But as for this match, I wash my hands of it. Confused silence rang in the air. It was finally broken by Mihi clearing her throat. I think I agree, she said diffidently. Ravel-sama, I request your help in that regard. You'll have it, Ravel said, nodding firmly. Mihi. Isabella said in dismay, and Issei was a little surprised at how much dismay she managed to pack into that one word. I'm sorry, Isabella, but Ravel-sama is right, the bishop said softly. A look passed between the two of them, and Issei suddenly realized what kind of relationship they had. Riser-sama is not acting honorably, and he doesn't seem to care how it affects those around him. This is all I can do. She held out a hand to the rook. Please. Come with me. Isabella looked tormented for a long moment. Finally, she closed her eyes and shook her head. I'm sorry, she half whispered. I gave my word. I know, Mihi replied, her expression at once solemn and sympathetic. As do I, Ravel agreed. Her gaze swept her peerage mates. My offer still stands. If you're interested, speak to me later. She cleared her throat. I surrender. The teleportation spell kicked in, and she disappeared. I surrender, Mihi added, her voice now firm. She was swept from the game field in a wash of light particles. Phoenix Bishop, retired. Phoenix Bishop, retired. Graphia's voice was openly stunned. Issei couldn't blame her. Anyone else? He said aloud, trying to keep his voice level. Well. That was unexpected, Akeno murmured over the conference call. She hovered 50 meters above her comrades and the opponent surrounding them. Do we still want to proceed with stand? Wait and see if anyone else follows Ravel-chan's lead, Riaz advised. I have to say, I'm surprised too. I guess Hyoudou-kun really impressed her in Kyoto. I don't think she really realizes how much, yet, Akeno said blithely. Standing by on my end. Asia-chan. I believe I have my targets lined up, Asia reported. Standing by as well. Screw this guy, Sira said, snorting. If Riser-sama wants him dead, I'll be happy to oblige. She started to lunge at Issei, then staggered backwards, stunned as an arrow wrought from distorted air struck her hard in the breadbasket, knocking her to the ground with enough concussive force to put her lights out. The next night, retired, Grafia reported. Her peerage mate stared in surprise. As they started to react, another arrow, equally insubstantial, arced high into the air and split into four, raining down and striking each of Riser's remaining servants. Unlike the one that had taken out Cirrus, these did nothing other than pulse a faint reddish white, not unlike some kind of signal beacon or targeting device for artillery. From her expression, Isabella was the first to parse the similarity. "Scatter," she yelled. "Find the mage who fired those arrows." She turned towards Issei, eyes narrowed, and threw herself at him, clearly intending to get inside his range before he could fire. Even as she did that, though, and even as her peerage mate started to scatter, Akeno's lightning began to fall. She was using her standard electrokinesis for this, they had long since agreed that her holy lightning needed to be saved, as much as possible, for Riser. But she was boosting her normal attacks as much as possible, with the help of Storm Dancer. Parliament was the first to go down, her mind still apparently stalled by her opponent's refusal of fair play. The lightning took her out before she could even scream. The next night, retired, Graphia's voice rang out. Nai and Lee were next, but they didn't go out alone. The two of them dodged Akeno's first strike, exchanging glances, and then charged at Issei, who immediately backpedaled. Akeno was walking her lightning up and down the field, trying to be mindful of her teammates while pressing her enemies. This resulted in both Issei and the twins having to dodge both her lightning and each other, neither able to land a telling blow. In the end, the contest was decided by Kiba, who met their demonic energy-charged fists with Holy Eraser's blade. The Sacred Gear's blade wavered but held, and Kiba quirked a quick smile at Issei. "I have them. Please make sure Isabella-san doesn't reach Asia-san." "You got it," Issei told him, turning to give chase. "Hyoudou-kun, are you sure?" Akeno trailed off. "Please, Akeno-san. Make it quick." Kiba's smile became strained, the blade wavering ever so slightly again. Akeno sighed. "I'll make it up to you." Lightning snarled down. Kiba managed to keep from crying out. The Nakamata twins were not so controlled. Bremery Knight, retired. Phoenix Pawn, retired. Phoenix Pawn, retired. As Kiba had said, Isabella was indeed going for Asia. The other rook had been the most observant one left and had sighted on Asia's position the moment the volley of arrows had been loosed. She was moving faster than a normal rook, not unlike Tsubasa when she was using momentum pillage to leech away an opponent's speed. Asia saw her coming. She paled, momentarily cowed by Isabella's pure determination, but bit her lip and manifested a magical shield before her. It buckled under the sheer force of Isabella's punch, but didn't collapse, and her teeth drew blood as she concentrated on boosting it. She didn't have to hold on for very long. Issei was right on Isabella's heels, but Kaneko reached her first. Like Isabella, Kaneko was far more agile than the average rook, and she was demonstrating it now as she drove Riser's last standing servant away from the magician. Her fists were cloaked in some kind of energy that wasn't elemental magic or demonic energy, and Isabella hissed as she blocked each strike with her forearms. Issei lined up his shot, electrokinesis flaring golden wide around his forearms, and yelled railgun. The clusters of roofing nails snarled forth at hypersonic speeds, leaving a Mach cone behind them, and the sound was unmissable. Even fully committed to fending off Kaneko, Isabella's situational awareness was fine-tuned. She managed to twist herself enough so that the ferrokinetic attack only grazed her. Of course, with hypersonic rounds, only graze translated to left nasty wounds, but they were nothing that a rook's durability couldn't handle for a few minutes. Until the nails turned on a dime and arced towards her again. Graphia had been correct. Issei had been able to fine-tune railgun and his fine control with unknown dictator, enough so that he actually could turn his projectiles into guided missiles. It was still early days, and steering them after launch meant he had to stay still and keep mentally correcting their course, but he was sure no one in Riser's peerage had seen it coming. Except, perhaps, Ravel. Why was he thinking about her right now? Certainly, Isabella didn't. Only as she sensed the movement behind her did she start to turn, and Kaneko and Asia both hit the deck and rolled. Issei felt another spike of guilt, stronger than he had with Shulin. He knew and respected Isabella, after all. But, again, this fight was literally a matter of life and death for him. Isabella didn't even cry out. A moment later, Graphia announced, her tone openly surprised now, Phoenix Rook, retired. She lapsed into a pensive silence, and when she spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. Riser-sama, your entire peerage has been eliminated. Do you wish to concede the match at this time? For a moment, Issei held his breath. He could see Asia and Kaneko, who were in the process of standing and dusting themselves off, doing the same. He imagined that Akeno and Kaori and Saji and even Rias were also waiting with bated breath. Certainly, Sona would be. After all they'd accomplished so quickly, it would be nice if Riser would have some sense. Naturally, he didn't. At first, the laugh was soft, almost musical, but it very quickly gained in volume, ringing with notes of disbelief and indignation. It wasn't, Issei thought resignedly, a very sane-sounding laugh. It cut off abruptly, and Riser spoke in a deeply affronted tone, as if speaking to anyone that wasn't him was somehow degrading to his dignity. I will not. If Riaz thinks she and her rabble can cheat their way to victory, they can come and meet me. Let them see the true power of a scion of the House of Phoenix. Be careful what you wish for, Riser, Riaz cautioned. My peerage is almost completely intact. Yours is in the recovery room. Incompetence and a little sister who doesn't know her place. Self-impressed confidence was slowly returning to Riser's voice. She'll learn. They'll suffer for their failure. You'll experience both, Riaz. Soon, you'll be begging for my forgiveness. I'll take that as a no then. Graphia's voice was dust dry. How are we handling this, Riaz? Akeno asked. I recommend colony drop. Seconded, Issei piped up immediately. We're almost completely whole. He felt a spike of guilt about Kiba, who had acted to protect him, but at least the knight was alive in the recovery room. And, Issei thought, he'd helped put them in the current position. Agreed. Riaz spoke positively, decisively. Everyone, colony drop is now in effect. We're taking him out. The plan had always amounted to all surviving peerage members converging on Riser's location and bombarding him while Saji sapped his immortality. Colony drop, though, was the best case scenario and brought Riaz out of her base. Hopefully, this would mean that he'd get put down nice and fast. Hopefully. But God, Ika murmured. Look what they did to that jerk's peerage. He had it coming, Tsubasa murmured back, and there was very little sympathy in her tone. I feel kinda bad for them, but it sounds like Ravel-sama will take care of them. Almost done, Ria said softly. This is almost done. Her eyes glanced toward Sona, and after a moment Ika and Tsubasa looked her way as well. Drive it home, Sona whispered. Her eyes were fixed on the display, her hands gripping Issei's uniform blazer almost hard enough to tear it. Do it now, Anada. Okay, we're here. Kaori looked at Saji as they waited in the main school building's foyer. The pawn had promoted tonight for the broken field run to Riser's base, and he had kept half cringing the entire way there, as if expecting him to descend while throwing fireballs. Not an unreasonable fear, really, but still you sure you're up to this, Saji-kun? Saji nodded as he straightened up, color returning to his face. Yeah. Just nervous. I can understand that, Kaori told him. I know you'll be fine, though. She put as much reassurance into her tone as she could. He'd sure put in the work over the last week, and absorption line had proven that it could sap a devil's innate powers as much as anything from a sacred gear or holy sword. If it could weaken Ria's power of destruction to the point where she was basically throwing paintballs, surely Riser's immortality wouldn't be immune. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Saji forcing a determined expression onto his face. I'm sure Kaichu will be proud of you, she said neutrally. He winced slightly, then nodded. I hope so, he replied. But I'm not that worried about it right now. Ah. Kaori nodded, keeping a knowing smile off her face. It was more of a struggle than she expected. It's probably for the best. So you finally noticed Momo-san and Raruko-chan, huh? Saji flushed, slumping his shoulders. After a moment, though, he let out a laugh. I suppose everyone else knew. Kaori patted his shoulder. Well, if it's any consolation, you weren't the only one who was clueless. Saji chuckled. I guess that's true. Congratulations, by the way. Thank you, she said, coloring slightly. Before she could say anything else, she heard footsteps, and it became clear from his expression that he did too. They turned to see Issei and the others entering the foyer, and she smiled at Issei. He returned it as he approached and reached out, squeezing her hands. She squeezed back, heedless of who might be watching. We're in the foyer, Akeno reported. We're just waiting on you, Riaz. I'm not coming. Ria's voice sounded glum over the peerage's communications network. I'm sorry. Go ahead without me. What do you mean, you're not coming in with us? Issei sounded slightly indignant. I assure you, it wasn't my idea. Riaz was started to sound pretty irritated, herself. Evidently Ani-sama thinks it's best if I stay where I am. Something about how the other pillar families would react to us ganging up on Riser in the endgame. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, Kaneko retorted sourly. Kaori had to agree. I agree, Riaz said darkly. For that matter, Ani-sama does, too. But he and Otu-sama are already getting calls about how needlessly brutal my peerage is being toward Risers. Never mind that they weren't holding back, either. So it's only okay if they and theirs do it, Kaori commented, letting out a snort. Her contemptuous tone was rather reflective of the general opinion towards the news. See, you're picking up devil politics already. Riaz sighed. I think we can probably manage, Riaz, Akeno opined. She sounded just as disgusted, but she also sounded confident. Even without you, we're in a very good position. Yes, you are, the Gremory heiress admitted. Be careful about it, though. Kaori couldn't fault the note of caution in her voice. It was true that they had the best case scenario right at their fingertips, but Ria's power of destruction would have sealed the deal. I have every confidence in you, Ria's continued. All of them knew that too. It was Riser that she didn't trust good hunting. Riser was waiting for them atop the roof of the main building. He snarled as Issei and the others fanned out, half encircling him. The awareness of how quickly and deftly his peerage had been defeated was clearly taking its toll, whether he'd admit it or not. His eyes darted back and forth, and he moved with the jerky motions of someone in the throes of a full-bore adrenaline surge. There was more than that going on here, though. Finally, he snapped. His phoenix fire cloaked him like a shroud, flickering and dancing wildly. "Good morning, Riser-san," Akeno said cheerfully. "Your entire peerage is in the recovery room. I don't suppose we can convince you to end this gracefully." "Low-born, half-crow bitch," Riser thundered. Now that Issei got a closer look at his eyes, he saw that his pupils were dilated. He really didn't look sane right now. You cheated. "How?" Issei snapped. "By not standing there and letting you gun us down." "Yes." Riser didn't even try to deny it. "I'm Riser Phoenix, and you're low-born scum. You should be honored to have me kill you and take your sacred gear. You should all be honored to be my servants." "Oh, fuck you, you Yankee fucker," Issei snarled. His own pyrokinesis awakened in turn, blue-white flames wrapping around him like a lover. "That's kind of redundant, Issei-kun," Akeno noted conversationally. "Not helping, Akeno ni." The rook hissed. "Promotion. Queen. Absorption line." Saji yelled, his sacred gear appearing around his left wrist. He manifested absorption line's tendrils and sent them snaking into Riser's phoenix flames. He winced at the sudden and painful spiritual feedback, but gritted his teeth and held on. Riser laughed at the pawn. "Idiot. What do you think you're doing? Do you really think low-born scum like you can, eh?" He blinked as his flames started flickering. For split seconds at a time, then for 1-second intervals. "Do it now, you guys." Saji called out, blood starting to trickle from his nose. At the same time, he produced another tendril, snaking it up to Riser and attaching it to his right ankle. The pawn's nose started bleeding faster as a result, but he hung on for dear life. He shot out a last one towards Akeno, channeling the stolen demonic energy into Ria's queen, and holy lightning began to skirl and crackle around her. Asia, grim-faced, stepped up beside Saji, manifesting the strongest magical barrier she could muster, and placing it in front of them. "Thanks, Saji. Eat this, asshole." Issei tossed his remaining ammunition into the air, shaping his hands into finger guns. The bundles of roofing nails broke apart, then spun around his hands and arms like the rotating barrels of twin Gatling guns. As he did, he applied as much lightning magic as he could muster, wreathing his arms in golden white static electricity and air distortion. "Railgun." He snapped, leveling his arms with a flourish, miming a firing action, and the nails exploded forth, crackling with enough electrical current to flash fry a razorback. He fired every round he had left. No time to hold back anything that could be spared. 60 electrified roofing nails exploded into Riser Phoenix's face at somewhere north of Mach 6. With Saji's sacred gear sapping his pyrokinesis and regeneration, the result was predictable. Riser screamed in pain and staggered backwards, knocked ass over to kettle by the sheer kinetic impact of so many projectiles hitting simultaneously. It was the scream of someone used to inflicting agony on others, but who had never experienced it himself. His entire upper body was a bloody mess. The iron projectiles that hadn't blown right through him pincushioned his torso, and his upper body still crackled with electricity. Somehow, though, he managed to keep from going entirely prone. His wounds were starting to knit, but with agonizing slowness. The minute his projectiles had hit, Issei summoned his mother's blue-white fire around his hands. "Rekadan." He snarled, starting to pelt Riser with the explosive flames as he approached. Senpai Saji started to call out, but Akeno was already responding. She spread out her hands, her signature magical circles flaring to life, and her holy lightning began to rain down upon the Phoenix King. Enhanced with Storm Dancer and the power stolen from Riser, she had become a one-woman thunderstorm, a walking person of mass destruction, and it showed. The holy lightning bit into Riser's body again and again, causing more screams and an unpleasant fragrance of scorched flesh. The queen curled her lips upward in a cruelly pleased smile and kept the holy attacks coming. The goal, of course, was to pile on the hurt faster than his body could heal it. Saji was managing to weaken both Riser's pyrokinesis and his regeneration, but even though he was promoted to bishop, it was taking almost everything he had. It was up to Issei and Akeno to finish this as fast as possible. Issei knew he was short on ammo now, and that Akeno had the ranged combat covered, so he needed to be doing what a rook was actually supposed to be good for. With a snarl, he hurled himself at Riser, an unknown dictator called the remaining ferrous debris to him, shaping it into jagged, spiked gauntlets around his hands. He charged the gauntlets with fire and lightning and drove one into the high-class devil's face and then the other. Kaneko dove in from the other side, keeping her punches and blows low to try and keep Riser off his feet. Clusters of shadow blades kept popping up in his shadow as well, courtesy of Kaori. The knight kept jerking her blade around randomly, trying to keep Riser hemmed in and unable to catch his breath. Rinse and repeat. No time to hold anything back, after all. Holy lightning snapped down in the seconds between Issei's and Kaneko's strikes. He and Akeno had put a lot of effort into synchronizing their attacks. It had only taken a few accidental zaps with that attack, probably accidental, it was Akeno, after all, to convince him to tighten up his timing. As they curbstomped Riser, Issei got another good look at his wounds, and what he saw was heartening. Absorption line was doing the job, slowing Riser's healing factor considerably. He was a scorched, crackling, bloody mess though, and the fact that he had kept trying to pull himself back upright was not encouraging. Was it just willpower or spite that had put him back on his feet, or was it something more? The thought wouldn't quite let go, and suddenly Riser was reacting. His expression was angry and agonizing, but somehow he was managing to push through the pain long enough to shove past Issei and pull together his phoenix fire. Issei whipped back around to him, already beginning to form Rekka dance, but he was merely a talented beginner. Riser had the advantage of lifelong training in his pyrokinesis, and he was sending it pouring forth in a torrent at Asia. Fucking willworker whore. He howled furiously. Asia's barrier flared brightly, resisting the brilliant flames. After a few minutes, however, it began buckling and showing cracks. Smoke and sparks swirled around her, but she gritted her teeth and pushed her will into it. Saji-san, keep draining him. She gritted out, sweat plastering her golden bangs to her forehead. Doing my best. Saji yelled back. Do you want me to move, so he'll lighten up on you? Cracks started spiderwebbing across the shield again, and this time Asia's will wasn't sufficient to smooth them away. She shook her head sharply, instead shifting so that her body was fully in front of Saji's. The pawn started to protest, but snapped his mouth shut, instead pushing as much of his own will into absorption line as he could. The faster he could finish this. Issei resumed firing Rekka dance at Riser, and the high-class devil was now ablaze in blue flame. His howls of anger and pain began to swing more towards pain, but his attack on Asia continued unabated. It was as if taking her down would be a moral victory for him. Damn it, stop. Issei yelled. Stop it now, damn it. That only made Riser smile, albeit a smile that was pained. A moment later, he wasn't smiling anymore and was in fact toppling over, his torrent of phoenix fire lashing upwards at nothing before petering out. Asia's barrier shattered and she slumped to the ground, barely conscious, but her face etched with relief. Issei blinked, looking to see Kaori. He blurted out, pleasantly surprised. The knight had stepped through his shadow, while his attention had been totally on Asia, beginning an Iajutsu draw even before she'd finished the transit. Yuzorajiri had made a bloody hash of his hamstrings, and the holy sword's touch further blunted his weakened regeneration. Yet, even as she whirled the blade above his head to deliver a coup de grace, Riser managed one last burst of phoenix fire, right into Kaori's face. She only had time to widen her eyes. Bremery Knight, retired, Grafia pronounced, her tone softly disapproving. By now, she had abandoned any pretense of neutrality. Kaori. Issei screamed as the knight disappeared in a flash of light. His eyes shifted back to Riser, his nostrils flaring, and with a cry of rage he surged upwards, exploding into his dragon form. His shriek now taking on a basso quality, he spat his mother's blue-white flames at the Phoenix King. As they struck Riser, he hurled himself after the attacks, dropping his bulk onto Riser, then rearing back and doing it again, and then again, and yet again. By the third impact, the rooftop was cracked and buckling. Issei's friends could only stare, awestruck. Well, that, and keep moving so that they weren't quite standing at ground zero. Sweet Mayu, Ravel whispered, watching the carnage unfold. She'd been right, after all. That was indisputable. But she hadn't expected to be this right. Ria's servants were fighting with everything they had, as if their lives depended on a win. It wasn't even a lie. Hyoudou-san's life clearly hung in the balance, although she had a suspicion that several people in Sona-san's peerage, including Sona-san herself, had planned for the possibility of failure. They were throwing what was that human expression? Everything but the kitchen sink, that was it. That's what they were throwing at Ani-sama. And Ani-sama had no choice but to take it exactly as he'd left his opponents with no choice. It was a testament to his strength as a high-class devil that he hadn't keeled over immediately, but it was just a matter of time at this point. The pawn with the Vritra gear was the one making it possible. She wondered who had come up with that idea. It was undeniably clever. And the holy swordswoman had sealed the deal with her last strike, effectively immobilizing Ani-sama. But it was Himejima-san and Hyoudou-san who were carrying the weight of this, and the sheer destructive power they had brought to bear was staggering. And then Murayama had been retired and Hyoudou had gone berserk. The outcome was no longer in doubt. No one, save perhaps Ani-sama with his near unassailable arrogance, could doubt it. Ravel just hoped Ani-sama had enough sense to resign before anything permanent happened. Maybe this would be good for him, teach him not to treat his opponents with contempt. She hoped. Issei reverted to human form and there was murder in his eyes. Resign now. He made a sharp gesture and the remaining ferrous debris shaped itself into scores of electrified flechettes, hovering in the air and poised to strike. He pointed them at Riser's inner thighs. Truth be told, he was pissed off enough to want to do it even if Riser did surrender. Seeing him blast Kaori out of the game had made his blood boil. Only the knowledge that she was actually alive and being healed was staying his hand. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that Saji was not only on his knees, but was half bent over, struggling to stay awake. Absorption line's tendrils were glowing and shimmering in a fashion that was not reassuring. Akeno was in slightly better shape, but she was clearly exhausted from being a one-woman photokinetic supercell. Asia was clearly on the verge of passing out and Kaneko was upright but haggard. If Riser managed to rally now, he wasn't sure they could repulse him again. Resign now, damn it, or I'll make a pincushion out of your nads. He thundered, trembling. Fine. Riser snarled or tried to. It came out as closer to a petulant whimper. He was prone, his wound still open and bleeding, his hamstrings still bloodied and severed from Kaori's last-ditch attack, his body crackling from multiple electrical strikes and smoking from the wholly aspected attacks and Rekadan blasts. Multiple bones cracked or broken from Issei's repeated draconic body slams, his regeneration slowed almost to nil, his phoenix's fire flickering and stuttering. He was the picture of defeat and looked as though he were dining on ashes. I resign. He vanished from the rooftop in a flare of light. Phoenix King, resigned. Graphia's voice was quietly relieved. Winner, Ria's Gremory's peerage. Congratulations. Issei sagged to his knees in relief, the ferrous fragments falling to the ground. He looked over at the others, giving them a grin of approval. Asia managed a weary smile. Oh. Good. It's over. She sank down against the wall, closing her eyes. Issei had never realized that she snored. Kaneko leaned against the wall herself, looking up at the faux sky. That was too close, she said solemnly. Issei nodded, rubbing his neck. Yeah. Saji flopped over on his side, pulling himself into a cross-legged sitting position after a moment. Absorption line's tendrils finally flickered out and the gauntlet vanished with an almost audible sigh of relief. He returned Issei's smile with an exhausted one of his own and then said tiredly, I'll make a pincushion out of your nads. What are you, 10? It was the first thing to come to mind. Issei protested, his cheeks heating. Akeno lowered herself carefully into Seiza, smiling slyly. I think you made the right move, Issei-kun. As you've seen, Riser is motivated primarily by his ego and libido. Because of Saji-kun, the risk of losing the source of the latter, even if he knows intellectually that it can be healed. The rooftop disappeared in a wash of sparkling light and Issei found himself and the others in the viewing gallery. The first thing he saw was Sona and Kaori approaching him. He rose carefully to his feet, just in time to be knocked back against the wall by the force of their combined embrace. Easy, he said softly, wrapping his arms tightly around them and kissing their cheeks. It's fine, we're fine. He kept repeating this over and over, kissing first Sona's hair, then Kaori's, trying to lose himself in their combined scent. His exhaustion was making it hard to stay upright, even with a rook's resilience, but he wasn't about to let himself fall over until they relaxed. That was his intention, anyway. No sooner had Sona's mouth, then Kaori's, found his, than tension started leaving his body. He slumped against the two of them, a silly smile on his face. As such, he wasn't sure just who started the clapping, but soon the viewing gallery rang with the sounds of celebration. Sona stepped out of the ensuite bathroom, smoothing down her dress. She gave Issei a slightly nervous smile. How does it look? You look amazing, Issei told her, trying not to drool. She wore a full sheath dress that matched her eyes. It had spaghetti straps and was slid up her left thigh to allow for movement. She wore matching heels and carried a matching clutch under her left arm. Her customary gold hair clip was still in place, but a delicate-looking hairpin made from malachite held her hair up in a quasi-French twist. He couldn't tell whether she was wearing light blush or was simply flushed. Either way, he wanted to kiss her until they were both out of breath and he told her as much. Sona smirked and gave him a quick kiss. Consider that a down payment for later. She looked Issei up and down as well, clearly pleased with what she saw. I very much like what I see, as well. That tuxedo suits you. Glad you think so, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. The Gremory tailors work fast, I guess. He gave himself a critical side eye in the mirror. The black tuxedo and matching loafers fit him almost as well as the suit Sona had gotten him. It was slightly different than the norm, featuring an ivory-banded collar shirt, a double-breasted jacket, and a cherry red pocket square. He'd done his best to tame his hair into something resembling respectable, but that was probably a lost cause at this point. "You're going to hold on to that tux," Sona told him. Her smirk had turned into a proud smile, as if she were a wife whose husband was about to receive a prestigious award. Which, when he thought about it, wasn't all that far off the mark. "I think there'll be quite a few instances where you'll need it." "I don't doubt it," Issei replied, his own smile a little rueful. "Sounds a little exhausting." "We'll minimize how much that interferes with us," she promised him, and looked up. The smile turned thoughtful. "That'll be Kaori." "You sound awfully certain of that," he commented, and opened the door. For the second time in 5 minutes, his eyes went wide, and he was stunned speechless by feminine beauty. "Hi." Kaori didn't quite meet his eyes, and her cheeks were pink. She wore a midnight blue tomasode with a crimson obi, and her hair was tied in a high ponytail with a ribbon that matched her obi. It made her look a little like a keno, but she pulled the look off way better in Issei's opinion. Finally, she met his eyes and smiled softly. "Ice, look at you, you look so handsome tonight." "You too," he told her quickly. "I mean, gorgeous. Both of you." "Thank you," she said, and shifted her gaze to Sona, relaxing slightly. "Sona-san, that dress is beautiful. You look great." "As do you, Kaori," Sona said approvingly. "And as far as I'm concerned, you can forego the honorific when it's just us." "Sona, then," Kaori said slowly, clearly testing how the words felt on her lips. "That'll take some getting used to." Her smile had relaxed by now, though. "Are you two ready?" "I think the party's ready to begin." "I'm still surprised that Ria-senpai's parents went ahead with the party," Issei commented. "I thought they wanted the marriage." "Lord Gremory is a nice man, but not reliably resolute," Sona answered, wrinkling her nose slightly. "I believe he had buyer's remorse about the arrangement almost immediately, but couldn't find what he felt was a respectable way to free Rias from it. And Lady Gremory was never happy with it to begin with." She shrugged. "So, now it's a celebration for her peerage and allies' victory in her first rating game. The food was already made, after all." "I guess that's the kind of thing we'll have to learn to deal with," Kaori said. "Yes." Sona nodded in confirmation. "The learning curve should be far gentler than this, though." She gave her Rukken Knight now, her future husband and co-wife an approving look. "You two and Saji-kun made the victory possible, and the House of Gremory realizes that. Whatever anyone else may think, you're heroes. So enjoy the party." She caught the look in Issei's eye and smirked. "No, Issei-kun, we can't just skip the party and hang out here." Kaori pinked again, but this time it was at least half from trying to suppress a snicker. Issei turned cherry red and grinned bashfully. "Stop seeing right through me, Sona-chan." "Stop being transparent then, Ice," Kaori laughed and took his left arm. "She's right, Anada," Sona said, her smirk turning back into a smile. She sidled up on his right side, claiming that arm. Issei looked from right to left. Their scents were, somehow, blending harmoniously. It was as though the kitchen window had been thrown open and the floral scents from the garden were wafting into the house while the fresh-baked cookie aroma was seeping out. Words couldn't fully describe how he felt right now. Overjoyed probably came closest, although somehow, it didn't feel quite complete. Like there was still a missing piece or two or maybe three. No, he told himself, that would be greedy, at least for right now. "Are you ready?" Sona nodded and Kaori said, "Let's go." "All right, then," he agreed, and the three of them strode down the hall towards the ballroom. The rest of Sona's peerage awaited them outside the double doors, and formal wear was apparently the uniform of the day. Tsubaki was dressed similarly to Kaori, but her tomasode was a deep forest green. She shifted slightly on her feet, her equivalent of anyone else's blatant fidgeting. Clearly, she was eager to join the party or to see Kiba. It was probably the same thing to her. Amo wore a wide A-line dress with an embellished halter bodice. Her hair was out of its normal twintails, styled into a neat half-updo, and she was already catching admiring looks from the male devils coming in and out of the ballroom. Honestly, all the girls in the peerage were, but Tomo seemed to be a special case. It was probably her innate upbeatness. The fact that she was virtually vibrating with excitement probably didn't hurt, though. Saji was also in a tuxedo, though his dinner jacket was snow white to contrast with the jet black pants. He wore a wine red bow tie and black Oxfords and kept fiddling with his tie. Haruko wore a navy blue A-line dress with a lace bodice. She wore her hair down and wavy tonight, which prompted a double take from Issei and snickers from Sona and Kaori. Momo wore a teal knee-length sheath dress with corset-style ties crisscrossing down her back. She smiled and moved easily in it, as if she'd long since become accustomed to such dresses. Both she and Haruko were clearly oriented on Saji, and remarkably, he was not only aware this time, but was reciprocating. Issei relaxed his shoulders slightly and caught a curious look from Kaori out of the corner of his eye. Sona just nodded slightly, it was unsurprising that she'd already sussed out what was going on. Issei then spotted his last 3 peerage mates and for a moment he had trouble breathing. It was just like seeing Sona and Kaori, if not quite as intense yet. Somehow, he knew that the yet was undeniable. Tsubasa wore a knee-length dress with an illusion inset bodice and it highlighted her figure magnificently. The dress was a shade or two lighter than her hair, which was worn normally. It was almost as if that were a nonchalant statement of "there's only so dressy you can get me," and it worked with that dress. Oh, man, did it work. The scent of fresh-picked strawberries that always surrounded her started to grow stronger. Her lips quirked upward in a smile as her eyes met his. Rya was dressed in a tulip skirt V-neck wrap party dress with spaghetti straps. Issei would later realize that the dress perfectly matched his pocket square. The bodice did very nice things for her bust and Issei couldn't quite keep his eyes off the floppy side tie. The thought of tugging it loose flashed through his mind and Rya's tolerant smile suggested that she guessed the direction his thoughts went. The bishop wore her long hair down tonight, it fell past her waist and was wavy and lustrous. That fragrance that he associated with her, the baked apples and cinnamon, was stronger than it had ever been before. Finally, Aika's hair was actually somewhat tamed. Her bangs were neatly combed and her hair was out of its usual messy cute pigtails, instead styled into a neat medium-length braid draped over her left shoulder. She was dressed in a strapless wine-colored jersey-style sheath dress with a black bolero jacket worn over it. This was the first time Issei had seen her wear something that really featured her cleavage and it was a real struggle to keep his eyes above her waist this time. She smirked a good-natured smirk in response and her own eyes dipped down for a moment, the smirk momentarily becoming an approving grin. He could almost taste the peppermint ice cream and cold milk that she smelled like. He cleared his throat and had to clear it again before he could actually speak. "Everyone looks great tonight." "You too, Iken," Tsubasa told him with a smile. Tsubaki nodded briskly. "Indeed. Shall we, Kaichu?" Sona gave her a go-ahead gesture. "By all means." Tsubaki pushed the double doors open and Sona Sitri's peerage entered the ballroom. "Is that him, Alevin?" The Agar's queen looked at his king. "Yes, Sakura-sama. That's Hyoudou Issei." "Interesting." The beautiful, bespectacled woman beeped her head, studying the young man. "You know his father, correct?" she asked. "Yes, he's an old friend. Hyoudou Goru is a Japanese dragon of some note. Some of it is even complimentary." He snorted in mild amusement, smirking as he poked good-natured fun at his friend's reputation. Sakura smiled faintly herself. She knew her queen's sense of humor well. "So you believe the report from their match?" "Indeed, I do." The dragon-turned-devil stroked his chin. "He has both his parents' talents and it's rather telling that he won Sona-sama's heart. He's definitely one to watch." "I think I agree," Sakura mused softly, sipping at her flute of champagne. Her face was impassive, but Sarah's eyes were thoughtful. "That's the guy who kicked Riser Phoenix's ass." The thuggish-looking man with spiky teal hair shook his head in disbelief. "I don't believe it. He looks like a stiff wind could knock him on his ass." "Don't judge a book by its cover, Zephyrdor." At the sound of the gentle chiding, Zephyrdor turned a dirty look on the speaker. The well-built man, goateed man had a completely shaved head and wore ceremonial armor over his formal robes. The look was typical of his uncle Falbium or, as he was better known, Falbium Asmodeus. "He may not look like much," the elder devil continued amiably, "but both Serafal and Ajuka consider him a friend. Not to mention Sona. Remember, she doesn't suffer fools lightly." "I dunno what you're talking about, Oji-san," Zephyrdor snorted. "She's never been particularly kind to me." The brief smirk on Falbium's face confused him. "That's as may be, then," Falbium added after a moment. "Be cordial, at least, if you two encounter each other tonight." Zephyrdor shrugged. He had better things to do than deal with a jumped-up reincarnate tonight. "So? That's the boy they're already calling the Phoenix Buster." The speaker was a lovely blonde with turquoise eyes, clad in a simple but elegant gown. "So it is," her companion agreed. His hair was bluish-black and slightly shaggy, his eyes violet, and the understated cut of his formal clothes did little to disguise the restrained power in his physique. "Watch the rest of the pillars present. All they seem to see is a reincarnate." He snorted softly. "Idiots. Not one of them seems to have seen the footage from Kyoto. Why would they? What's there that's important to a member of the pillars?" The woman's tone was a nearly pitch-perfect mockery of an average scion of the 72 pillars. "I've heard the tongue-wagging about Sona-sama. There's more than one young man pissed off that she wouldn't be reasonable with her standards, and the thought of a reincarnate just pisses them off." "We already knew the underworld was full of idiots, Kusha," he said, smiling faintly. "I imagine she's paying them exactly as much attention as they deserve." "None, you mean," Kusha replied with a grin. He nodded a salute to her, but his eyes kept drifting back to the young man. "If I didn't know better, Sarah Erg-sama, I'd think you had a crush," she teased. You're the only one for me, Kusha. Sarayag reached up and caressed her face, a rare moment of public affection. But he's intriguing. He was silent for a moment, then nodded. Remind me to speak to Sona at the Young Devils gathering. I want to see her peerage in action. I had thought that it would be Riaz who would put together a true challenge, but he trailed off meaningfully. Yes, Sarayag-sama. You all look wonderful. Riaz met them with a huge smile. She wore a close-fitting cyan beep-tail dress that matched her eyes. Please, let me introduce my parents. She gestured to two elegantly attired figures who looked little older than Surzich's. My father, Zeodicus, Duke of Gremory, and his lady wife, my mother Venelana. Otu-sama, Aka-sama, these are the members of Sona's peerage who helped mine triumph. She first indicated Saji. Saji Genshiru-kun, her pawn. Her hand then gestured to Kaori. Murayama Kaori-san, her newest knight. Finally, she turned to Issei. And her new rook, Hyoudou Issei-kun. That smile turned mischievous. He's also her fiancé. We've heard about all of you. Zeodicus wore his hair long and sported a tidy goatee. He shook each of their hands in turn and looked especially pleased to meet Issei. I'm most grateful to the three of you for assisting Riaz. Yes, indeed. Venelana was, essentially, a slightly older version of Riaz with light brown hair, albeit with violet eyes, and her dress made the most of her exquisite figure. Sona-chan, everyone, we owe you a debt. She grimaced, giving her husband a mildly baleful look. We really never should have agreed to that engagement in the first place. Zeodicus didn't exactly cringe, but it was clear that he was cowed by his wife. It was more than a little reminiscent of Surzich's and Grafia. I know, Lana. I already agreed with you about that. Issei rubbed the back of his head. It was no trouble, really, he said. It was a blatant lie, of course, but it was the kind of blatant lie polite society demanded. We were glad to help. And that only makes us more grateful. Venelana gave Issei a motherly smile. Please, make yourselves at home. Riaz gestured expansively to the massive ballroom. The buffet table and open bar were already doing a brisk trade and couples were circulating through the dance floor. It's as much your party as mine, now. There are people here who don't like that fact, but they can go to heaven. Language, Riaz, Venelana said mildly. Riaz just snorted and Venelana made a show of shaking her head at her daughter's unladylike behavior. It had the appearance of an old family joke and Issei couldn't help joining in the ripple of laughter. There you guys are. Issei turned and blinked. For a moment, he seemed to be staring at a slightly older version of himself and Kaori, except he was wearing glasses and she had her combed back in a neat ponytail. Then the penny dropped and he realized he was looking at his parents as they truly were. One more thing to get used to, he thought. Aloud, he said, I didn't know you were looking for us, Tu-san, Ka-san. Seraful-san asked us to make sure you guys stayed put, Goru said cheerily. She has someone she wants you to meet. Out of the corner of his eye, Issei Sona's expression shifted to curiosity. Zeodicus, Venelana-san, it's been some time. You're both looking very well. As are you too, Zeodicus answered, inclining his head. When was the last time? That dreadful business in Tanegashima? I believe so. Rio gave them a polite bow. It's good to see you two again. You have no excuse not to visit, Venelana said meaningfully. Particularly since our children know each other now. There really isn't anyone you two don't know, is there? Issei said, his tone somewhere between amused and exasperated. He still had no idea why he'd been kept in the dark about his parents' involvement with the supernatural world, although he was starting to think it stemmed from all the introductions they would have had to make. Oh, good. Seraful approached. For once, she wasn't dressed like a magical girl. The long gray skirt, forest green blouse, and black casket made her look like a schoolteacher, but the effect was surprisingly professional for the first time. Issei mused, she looked like the co-ruler of devilkind that she was. Seraful was accompanied by 4 people. The first, her body language strangely reminiscent of Tsubaki's when she was around Sona, was a quietly pretty girl with wine-colored eyes and wavy, shoulder-length pinkish beige hair. She wore a dove gray sheath dress with a wine-colored wrap around her shoulders and radiated an aura of calm competence. The second was a handsome blonde man with a sleepily amiable expression. His golden eyes seemed to be almost completely closed, although when Issei caught sight of them, they were piercingly intelligent. He wore a cobalt blue tailored business suit with a black Oxford shirt and crimson necktie and seemed to be nursing a glass of something electric blue. Literally electric in this case, Issei could swear that he saw actual sparks of static electricity in the azure liquid. He and the pink-haired girl had their bodies subtly oriented on each other. Something about them suggested that they had known each other for a long time in every possible interpretation of the word. The third was a man who appeared to be in healthy, vigorous middle age. He had iron gray hair and aquiline features, and his brown eyes were both gentle and wise. Even the scar across his face only added to his air of quiet gravitas. Like the blonde man, he wore a dark blue suit, although his white shirt was a banded collar one, just like Issei's. The last figure was a beautiful Eurasian woman in a black beep-tailed dress. She wore her dark hair up in a loose bun and had her hands wrapped around the gray-haired man's arm. She appeared to be a few years younger than her companion and gave off an air of calm, confident competence. Like the other pair, she and her companion seemed to have been lovers for a long time. Sona spoke, her tone one of pleased surprise. Oji-sama. Catherine Abasama. She smiled with an intensity Issei had rarely seen. Hello, Sona-chan. The man offered her a hug and they embraced enthusiastically, and the scene repeated a moment later with the Eurasian woman. Eventually, Sona turned back towards Issei, still smiling. Oji-sama, this is Hyoudou Issei-kun and Murayama Kaori, my fiancés. She pinked slightly as she said that, but still looked pleased. Issei-kun Kaori, this is my uncle, Sona Sitri, and my aunt, his queen and wife, Catherine Sakai. And with them are Wani-sama's queen, Behemoth-san, and her bishop, Ziz-san. Issei bowed quickly and deeply. Somehow, he was more impressed by these people than by the demeanor that Devilkind's actual rulers seemed to present. I'm pleased to meet you all. Kaori did likewise, although he sensed some mild amusement from her. Nice to formally meet you, Hyoudou-kun, Behemoth said with a wry smile. And you, Murayama-san. All I can say is that you must have made quite the impression on Ravel-chan. She made a point of contacting me on your behalf. That has to be an exaggeration. Issei felt his face heat slightly. Balin offered Issei his hand. It's nice to finally meet you, Issei-kun. Sona's spoken of little beside you in her letters. After shaking his hand, he shook Kaori and Saji's hands in turn, before turning his slight smile on Ria's. Ria's-chan, you're looking well. Thank you. It's been ages, Ria's replied, her smile now more relaxed. It's a pleasant surprise to see you here. I thought you were still studying in Torino. We're taking a break, Catherine explained. Valen wanted to come back and touch base with family. And Sirafel knew we'd come back to the underworld, Valen finished. She has a sense for that sort of thing. He smiled. Don't let us keep you guys from enjoying the party, though. We'll be in the underworld for a while. There'll be plenty of time for us to catch up. Sona bit her lip, looking torn. Are you sure, Oji-sama? Go on with you. Catherine gave Sona a gentle quasi-shove. Have fun with your friends. Sona nodded after a minute, reaching for Issei's hand. He felt Kaori take his other one. We'll see you later, then. Just let us old folks catch up with each other, Goro opined, chuckling. Sona smiled slightly and let Issei tug her and Kaori in the direction of the dance floor. She let out a sigh of satisfaction. That was a nice surprise from Wani-sama. Yeah, Issei agreed. Your aunt and uncle seem nice. What did senpai mean about them studying somewhere? Kaori asked curiously as they weaved their way through the dancing couples. Are they teachers or something? Sort of, Sona explained. They're explorers and archaeologists. Oji-sama's specialty is finding and researching sacred gears. He'll probably want to quiz you about yours at some point, Issei-kun. That seems fair, Issei said. Maybe he'll be able to tell me something that Ijuka-sama can't. It's possible, Sona told him. He and Ijuka-sama are generally considered our leading experts on sacred gears. There are rumors, though, that the leader of the fallen angels may know even more. I doubt you'll have a chance to ask him anytime soon, though. Probably not, Kaori opined. Let's let that rest for the moment, though. She grinned at Issei. I think you owe us some dances. I think Kaori is right, Sona said, her smile shifting into a smirk. Trade-off. Kaori nodded, making a show of looking thoughtful. I assume you want to go first. This time, you can, Sona told her, catching Ria's making her way towards them. I think Ria's wants to talk first. But I will be along to collect soon. I don't get a choice in this, do I? Issei tried to sound put upon, but he could not muster any kind of real objection. His fiancés turned to him, affection and amusement writ plain on their features. Nope, they said in unison. I still can't believe we pulled it off. Ria's was giddy. She had been giddy, in fact, since the end of the match. She had also, Sona observed with mildly concerned amusement, not slept a wink since its conclusion. Everyone else had. She and Issei had collapsed on the bed in their guest suite sometime around 2 a.m., too drained to even fool around. They'd only stirred long enough to pull Kaori into the pile when she'd come to check on them. I had faith, Sona told her with a smile. It was a little close at times, but you grabbed the initiative and kept the momentum. She raised the flute of sparkling cider in a salute. You did well. With your help, Ria's replied, returning the toast. And your people. Especially Hyoudou-kun. She glanced across the room, and Sona followed her eyes. What she saw made her grin. Issei and Kaori, trying their best not to stumble their way through a waltz, but having fun flailing around together. It's almost a pity I didn't meet him first, Ria said, her voice faintly wistful. Sona snorted, shaking her head. I don't think we'd share well. No, probably not. It was Ria's turn to let out an amused snort. If only he had a twin brother. I'm not comfortable with where this is going, Sona said, her tone suddenly going cool. Ria's waved her hands quickly in protest. Don't worry. I couldn't ever see him as anything but a little brother. Someone like him, though she shook her head. After all, it's not like the issue is resolved forever. Sooner or later, someone's going to Suikoto Sama again, and this time, they'll know better than to give me a loophole. Sona looked at her thoughtfully. After several minutes, during which Ria's began to squirm under the scrutiny, she finally said, maybe what you need is something to hold those suitors at bay. Just until you can find a more permanent solution. Ria's nodded slowly. That's exactly what I need. She beeped her head, narrowing her eyes slightly. What are you thinking of? Sona nodded towards the door to the balcony. Not in here. Too many prying ears. It had been a good night, Issei reflected. Alternating dancing with Sona and Kaori had been fun, even if he still had 2 left feet when it came to actual dances themselves. At least with slow dances, though, it was more an excuse to hold each other and sway to the music than anything else. The slow love song being played was winding down when he realized someone was waiting for him. Tsubasa stood there, smiling lopsidedly. There was an odd something to that smile, though. Mind if I cut in? Issei's eyes shifted to Kaori, who raised both eyebrows. After a moment, she smirked good-naturedly and held up a finger. One dance. You may get more if you behave. She slid gracefully out of Issei's arms. I'm going to get something to eat. Want me to fix you a plate? Yeah, thank you. They had what looked like some yakitori skewers. Kaori slapped him gently on the shoulder. Find me when you're done. Have fun. She glided off into the crowd, humming softly. You two seem to be having a good time tonight, Tsubasa teased as they danced. His fellow rook was almost as light on her feet as Kaori and slightly better at compensating for Issei's clumsiness. So do you, Issei countered lightly, trying to will the heat away from his face. It wasn't working. The two of them worked their way around the dance floor and the scent of freshly picked strawberries grew stronger in his nostrils. He could almost taste them. He wanted to know if her kisses would taste like them. I can't just keep tamping it down, he thought to himself. I want Basa-chan, too. And Aika-san, and Rya-san. And the more I think about it, the more I think that they don't mind the idea. Hey, he said softly. I want to talk to you about something. As she beeped her head thoughtfully, he hurriedly added, nothing bad. Just something that's been on my mind. Tomorrow? Sure, Tsubasa replied. Her smile turned slightly mischievous. Just me? Issei chuckled nervously. No. That's about what I thought. That admission on her part raised his eyebrows. Tsubasa just grinned at his reaction. Tomorrow, then. Talk to the others. Well. That was quite a party. Issei grinned punchily at Sona and Kaori, and their smiles of response were just as sloppy and tired. For all the pomp and spectacle of the ball, they hadn't actually stayed that long. After about 2 hours, Rias had quietly beckoned Sona over, and after a moment she'd assembled her peerage alongside Rias. Serafal, Behemoth and Ziz had been present as well, and, much to Issei's surprise, his parents, as well as Surzich's and Grafia and Sona's aunt and uncle, had been there too. Rias had worn an impish smile as she summoned a teleportation circle and whisked all of them away. When the light faded, they were standing in the very same karaoke joint where they'd celebrated Fried Selzen's defeat. And this time, the Gremory heiress announced gleefully, she'd arranged for them to have the complete run of the place. They violated numerous noise ordinances that evening. By even human standards, this more informal victory party wasn't particularly wild. Issei didn't think there had been any orgies, although he hadn't tried too hard to keep track of where his parents had gotten off to. But the very informality of it, Sona and Rias had both had pointed comments on the judgmental eyes of the other pillar families, coupled with the slow bleeding tension and giddiness from the day's earlier events, had brought with it a need to relax and let loose. And if that caused them to be overly enthusiastic with the mics and equipment, well, the House of Gremory was well known for its generosity. And that, he concluded muzzily, was why they were only returning to the Gremory estate at 2:30 in the morning. It probably would have been later if Grafia had not been drunk enough to start singing Sade. According to Rias, that was a sure sign that she and Surzich's were about to get amorous in public. Issei was both relieved and disappointed to miss that. So Kaori leaned against him as he slipped one arm around her waist and the other around Sona's. Now what? Well, how about this? Issei leaned down and they kissed lingeringly. As they slowly broke the kiss, he turned toward Sona and their kiss lingered longer. Sona reached out, wrapping one arm around Kaori's waist, and she let out a soft sound as she was drawn closer. In the dim light, her expression was both anticipatory and nervous. Issei managed a reassuring smile. The urge to be balls deep inside both his fiancées, simultaneously, and somehow he knew that was possible, even if he didn't know how, threatened to overwhelm him for a moment, but he managed to choke it back. We don't have to rush things. We can move as quickly or as slowly as you're comfortable with. Yes. After all, you and Issei-kun have only been engaged for a day, Sona agreed, her voice soft and husky now. It made her sound even more erotic than usual, and Issei suppressed a shiver. You don't need to push yourself further than you're ready for, Kaori. Kaori's expression mingled relief and guilt, disappointment and desire. I want to do stuff. I'm just not ready for that tonight. I wish I were. We waited a whole week after we got together, Sona said, her smile atypically mischievous. Kaori's face pinked prettily, and she laughed. A whole week. Now that's willpower. I have an idea to relax us, Sona continued. We don't need to rush, and it's better that we simply enjoy each other's company rather than try to reach notional milestones. Her violet eyes shone in the dim light. Interested? Kaori beat her head, her body language relaxing. What did you have in mind? Oh my god, it is. Kaori pointed at the widescreen TV, her expression disbelieving. That is a papier match MRI machine. Right. Issei said in a vindicated tone, and Sona nodded firmly in agreement. The three of them sat on the large couch facing the TV, snacks and drink sitting on the coffee table before them. Issei wore boxers and a t-shirt, while Sona wore skimpy sleep shorts and a camisole, and Kaori wore an ISF t-shirt over her panties. The three of them were half cuddled on the couch together, a comforter draped over them, watching a movie whose ineptitude beggared the imagination. This is deliberately bad, right? Kaori asked hopefully. Some kind of satire or parody. Sona shook her head. The interviews we found with the director strongly suggest that he thinks he made a straightforward murder mystery. Is he high? Or an idiot? I believe both, Issei commented. He held Sona's left hand in his right, their fingers interlaced, and his left arm was draped around Kaori's shoulders. She was snuggled in comfortably underneath it. It just keeps getting better. Watch. Kaori nodded dubiously, reaching out and grabbing the bowl of popcorn. As they nibbled at the contents, she commented, this is some of the worst acting I've ever seen. And I was in drama club in middle school. I remember that, Issei said. I hate to say it, but that production of Romeo and Juliet in second year was really, really bad. I wish I could argue that, she said glumly. The three of them snuggled closer under the comforter as the movie progressed along its alleged plot. I suppose you're all wondering why I called you here today, Issei joked weakly. He sat on a padded bench on one of the Gremory Estate's verandas, flanked by Sona and Kaori. Tsubasa, Ria and Aika sat across from them on another bench. Between them sat a low table with 6 glasses and a large crystalline carafe of lemonade. Riaz had arranged for it without even needing to be asked, prompting Issei to suspect that she and Sona had had a chat. For obvious reasons, breakfast had been shelved in favor of a very late brunch. It was just as well. About the time breakfast would have normally been served well, neither Issei nor his fiancées would have been in any way presentable for the meal. Falling asleep at awkward angles on the couch tended to produce that effect. Now, the early afternoon following the party, everyone was back to looking more or less like themselves. Not so dolled up anymore, but the 5 of them still took Issei's breath away. The way they were now, the way they really were, that was what he had fallen for. For what felt like an eternity, an awkward silence rang out in the late morning air. Then Tsubasa held out a hand. Pay up, ladies. Ria and Aika rolled their eyes, but produced their purses from out of thin air. What? Issei asked in a flat tone. I'd bet them that you'd want to talk about this today, as early as possible, Tsubasa replied with a gentle smile. After the last week, I figured you wouldn't want to waste time. I was half expecting last night, Aika admitted. The way you kept looking at us, Ikun. Her ever-present smirk was gentler than usual. I'm not sure our dresses would have survived any intense discussions. Hey, now, Issei started to protest, but Tsubasa held up a hand. Her smile was somewhere between Ria's gentle grin and Aika's smirk, and her cheeks were unusually pink. Relax, Ice-chan. We know you'd never hurt anyone, given the choice. Especially not the girls you like. Issei winced as she said the words. Exactly how transparent am I? He finally asked, trying to keep resigned exasperation out of his voice. He wasn't successful. Lass, Aika said, her smirk softening. But that's one of the things we like about you. Aichu talked to Ria and I the day after you signed the Thursday night contract, Tsubasa explained. She idly twirled a cheese fork between her fingers. That was 3 months ago, Issei murmured, not sure how he felt about that. She figured that if anyone in her peerage was going to develop feelings for you, and vice versa, it'd be us. Tsubasa's smile was slightly sardonic, but he could see the affection behind it. He wondered if he'd just been afraid to admit he saw it before. We know better than to bet against her. She talked to Kaori and I the Sunday after we joined up, Aika added. Like Tsubasa-chan said, Kaichu's good at figuring the odds. She raised an eyebrow as she gazed at Issei. Maybe now you'll actually tell us what we smell like to you. Baruch took a deep breath before speaking. The sense of the 5 young women before him seemed to start blending. Not a harmonious whole, not yet, but the potential for that hung in the air before him. He looked at Aika first. Peppermint ice cream and cold milk in the process of being mixed into a milkshake. His eyes shifted to Tsubasa next. Freshly picked strawberries in the summer sun. Finally, his eyes found Rya's, and he was surprised to see her smile seem a little tremulous. Baked apples and cinnamon. The 3 of you, your scents are stronger than anyone besides Sona-chan and Kaori. Say it, Ice-chan, Tsubasa insisted gently. You know what it means. Issei forced his shoulders to relax. I think no, I know I like you 3. Romantically, sexually I won't say I love you yet, but I'm headed that direction. He was pushing out the words before his sense of self-preservation could stop him. You know what Sona-chan said are the requirements for me having a harem. I want to apply them to you 3, if you're interested. When we're all ready, he managed a self-mocking laugh. And if you're not, please just pretend we never had this conversation. He felt Sona squeeze his right hand, and Kaori did the same with his left after a moment. There was a long contemplative silence. Tsubasa was the one to finally break it after taking a sip of lemonade. Can we ease into this? I don't think I'm ready to pull a Kaori. That'd better not become a thing, Kaori half grumbled as a laugh rippled around the table. Despite that, the comment did seem to break some of the tension. Issei smiled gently. Sure. Like I told Kaori, we can move as fast or as slow as you're comfortable with. If you need some time to think it over, that's fine. Rya and I have had months, Tsubasa said, shaking her head. There might have been hints of trepidation in her expression, but not trace one of doubt. I can't speak for her, but I know what I want. Rya beeped her head, looking pensive, and nodded in agreement. Honestly, if Kaichu hadn't been interested, we'd probably have proposed something like this to you. Are you serious? Issei knew his expression was one of dull-witted shock, but he couldn't help it. As they nodded, he slumped his shoulders in relief and shifted his gaze towards Aika. Aika-san. I think I will need to think about this, she said thoughtfully. She was silent for a moment, then her smirk returned. Nope, I'm sure. She took her glasses off for a moment, using her t-shirt to clean them, and looked him in the eye. Issei didn't think he'd ever fully appreciated how warm they could be. I'm in. Oh. Oh. Well, good. That had to be the lamest thing he'd ever said, Issei thought, and the sudden wave of amusement he sensed rippling around the table seemed to confirm it. But what he'd just learned more than outweighed the minor embarrassment. Rya's smile mirrored his, and she leaned forward, popping a grape into her mouth. The action was strangely mesmerizing, and the edge of mischief that slipped into her eyes told Issei that she hadn't missed his reaction. When the time comes, Ikun, I want a fancy proposal. Dinner and dancing, a night out on the town to celebrate. Aika nodded, her smirk softening. Don't forget making out under the moonlight. That's key. Tsubasa made a face. That kind of thing isn't my style. Out in nature or on the beach or something like that. Now you're talking. She abruptly leaned across the table and kissed him firmly. She didn't taste like strawberries, not exactly, Issei mused. Well, the part of him that could think clearly, anyway. Her kiss tasted like her, but somehow with undertones of sun-kissed berries. It was just like how Kaori's scent translated to her taste. He wanted more. When she finally drew back, both of them were red-faced and breathing raggedly. Tsubasa spoke first, her tone speculative. I don't know if I'm ready to call you my fiancé yet, though. Especially not until we figure out how to deal with this at school. I think I'd rather just be your girlfriend for a while. She smiled slightly. Just for a while, though. Your endgame, I want that too. Ahem. My turn, Rya said brightly, standing and rounding the table herself. Once Tsubasa had pulled back, she kissed Issei aggressively, half straddling him for a brief delicious moment. Once again, baked apples and cinnamon were underlying her natural flavor, and he felt almost drunk. When their lips finally parted, she murmured against his mouth, yes. I feel the same way. But I'm like Tsubasa, I don't want to skip right to fiancé. I'll be your girlfriend for now. She looked at Kaori and Sona, and Aika and Tsubasa. All of yours, too. She grinned. When in the underworld, Aika said blithely, but there was a kind of nervous anticipation to her body language. She stood, rounding the table, and gently nudged Rya out of the way so she could kiss Issei. Like the other girls, her kiss had undertones of the flavor associated with her scent, rather than tasting exactly like it. When she broke the kiss, she looked more demure than he'd ever seen her. It was enchanting. That's a yes, by the way, she murmured. To being one of your girlfriends. I'm good with the engagement coming later. We've created a monster, Kaori stage whispered to Sona. She sounded more amused than anything else, and Sona replied with a chuckle, indicating that she felt the same. "We'd better work out a schedule, then," Kaori said, smiling. She turned Issei's head just enough so that she could kiss him as well. "Yes. Once we get back to Kuo, we should," Sona agreed. She took his right hand in both her hands, as if to subtly enforce her dominant position in the "oh, God. I really do have a harem now," Issei thought. He still felt a little drunk. Tsubasa looked thoughtful. "I kind of like that. We all know where we want this to go, after all. No need to push too hard right now, is there? Not when we're on the same page." She chuckled. "Girlfriends and fiancés, Ice-chan. You really are a rapacious dragon, aren't you?" Her smile was teasing, with just a hint of lasciviousness. "We need a bigger bench, though," Ryo piped up. "Or to teach Akun some duplication magic." "Why do you think I want to hurry him to middle class?" Sona said, and a soft, sweet laugh rippled around the veranda. Now Issei felt their respective scents starting to integrate with each other, growing slowly but surely into a harmonious whole. At the same time, he still had that vague feeling that there were scents missing. He couldn't imagine what they were, though. That was something for another day, though. He couldn't imagine wanting more than who he was looking at right now. "You can't be serious," Issei said an hour later. He stared exasperatedly at the massive projection screen. "Yes, I am." Surziches seemed highly amused as he fiddled with the remote. He, Grafia and Serafal had asked Sona and Ria's peerages to meet them in the Gremory Estates Theater. The room was cozier than a normal cinema would be, with angled rows of long plush couches instead of the normal bucket seats. "You guys are famous right now." He pointed at the screen, and Issei found himself watching the final fight against Riser. It was very strange to see himself on the huge screen, particularly when he went full on dragon. Something seemed off, though, and he realized that there was music playing. He definitely didn't remember music during the fight. Wait. He groaned and facepalmed as he recognized the orchestral piece. He and Sona had watched that movie again recently. Sona's eyebrows shot upward. She clearly recognized it too. "I'll admit that the Attack of the Clone soundtrack is a good choice," she managed, her tone judicious. "We need to get you a lightsaber, Akun," Ryo said brightly. "Right." Serafal agreed. She looked highly amused. "Show them the others." "There are more?" Kaori asked dubiously. Serafal nodded enthusiastically. "Not only that, everyone who actually took down Riser has gotten a nickname. The Undernet doesn't waste time." She smiled wryly. "I'm not sure you understand just how many people Riser Phoenix has rubbed the wrong way. Seeing him get tossed around like a rag doll made a lot of folks happy." "Nicknames?" Issei repeated, looking like he was about to cringe. "Yep." Serafal pointed at Akeno. "Akeno-chan, you're being called the Phoenix Blaster because of all the holy lightning you threw at him." Her finger shifted to Saji. "Sakun, you and Asia-chan are the Phoenix Breakers because your sacred gear made it possible to actually hurt him and her magic kept you shielded while you were doing that." That finger of hers now pointed at Kaori. "Kaori-chan is the Phoenix Cutter for obvious reasons." She finally turned towards Issei, and her mischievous smile was almost blinding. "And Iken and Kaneko-chan are the Phoenix Busters because of how you two kicked his ass in close combat. Particularly you, Iken, with that draconic beatdown you gave him." "That's actually a lot better than I expected," Issei admitted. "It's also marketable," Serafal pointed out. "I'll be sitting down with some people to discuss it next week. This is a good way to start building a nest egg for your peerage." "I guess I can't argue with that. Riser's really hated that much, huh?" "His personality isn't such that endears itself to other people," Grafia interjected mildly. "That footage of you forcing him to resign has already gained you some popularity." Surziches pulled the next video up on DeviTube. This one was the final fight against Riser again, but it had been ridiculously sped up and set to a zany-sounding instrumental track. It sounded vaguely familiar, but Issei couldn't place it. Grafia wrinkled her nose. "Really? The Benny Hill theme?" "Hey, don't blame me, I didn't do it." Surziches protested, holding up both hands. "All I did was find it." "You're lucky I know you can't video edit worth a damn," Grafia remarked dryly, taking a sip from her teacup. "Oh, this one is my favorite." Surziches clicked on the DeviTube clip. It was taken from a semi-obscure American action comedy about disavowed special forces troops out for revenge. In the scene, the team hacker was holding finger guns on a security guard, threatening him with apparent telekinesis, which was actually his sniper comrade in a nearby building. Instead of the actual dialogue, Issei heard his own voice shouting, "Resign now, damn it, or I'll make a pincushion out of your nads." The Journey song from the original scene was still there, though, so that was nice. "Oh my god," Issei groaned, facepalming. Sona patted his back, but her neutral demeanor was showing cracks, and amused approval was clearly present. The rest of her peerage was showing the same reaction, to varying degrees. "I rather like the one with the clip from A Few Good Men," Grafia said thoughtfully. Issei just groaned again. Tsubasa patted Issei on the shoulder. "See, Ice-chan. You're famous already. His family is gonna want my head on a pike," Issei mumbled. "They can want it all they like," Sona said flatly. "They won't get it." Kaori nodded firmly, resting one hand on Yuzorigiri's hilt. "Ah, yes, funny thing," Surziches piped up. "The House of Phoenix will actually not be seeking retribution." Both Lady Phoenix and Ravel-chan were insistent. "What?" "It's actually thanks to Asia-chan and to what Issei-kun said about it," Surziches explained. "All I did was mouth off about how I was protecting my sister and how any big brother worth a damn would do the same thing," Issei said, his cheeks heating. "I remember. I was there. And that is exactly what Ravel said when defending you," Surziches replied triumphantly. "And her mother agreed, and when Lady Phoenix makes up her mind, Lord Phoenix is smart enough not to fight against the tide." Riser's brothers aren't exactly thrilled with the reasoning, but they're not really resisting it. He eyed the younger devil appraisingly. "I think you made quite an impression on her." "That's got to be an exaggeration," Issei muttered. He wasn't sure how he felt about that or the looks that his girlfriends exchanged. He still couldn't quite believe he had a harem now. "Then there's the little matter of his intention to renege on the deal he made with Sotan," Serafal added. "That's been leaked and I'm pretty sure it was Ravel-chan who leaked it. The House of Phoenix is doing their best to make sure all the egg ends up on Riser's face. Which is where it belongs, really." Issei's future sister-in-law was just as pissed off about what Riser had planned for Issei as Sona was. "I don't suppose I can sue the House of Phoenix for damages?" then Issei asked jokingly. Instead of chuckles, Surziches and Serafal and, ominously, Sona exchanged looks. Finally, Sona said thoughtfully, "It's possible something could be arranged." Alarm bells went off in Issei's head. "Ah, never mind, it sounds like that could be a hassle," he said quickly. "No, I think Ravel-chan might be easy to persuade," Serafal said, her tone matching Sona's. "Okay, I don't think I like where this is going," Issei said, raising his voice slightly. "Let's just leave it for now." "Actually, that brings me to the actual reason for this conversation," Surziches said with a grin. "I owe all of you for freeing my sister from that engagement. Especially the three of you who fought with her peerage in the match. I don't have any doubt that she would have been miserable." He sighed, his expression growing solemn. "I really should have taken a more proactive role in pulling her out." Raffia's expression softened fractionally and she squeezed her husband's hand. "You were just as trapped in your role as Ryasama was. If anyone was to blame, well, it wasn't you." Ryas nodded. "Like I told you, Ani-sama, I never held you responsible." "Be that as it may, I owe your friends," Surziches told her, his expression serious. "If it wouldn't set the pillars aflame with outrage, I'd bump the three of you to middle class right now." "We understand, Surzich-sama," Kaori said politely, and Issei nodded in agreement. "I get why you can't," the rook mused. "The Mayu are limited in how much pull they can use in situations like this, particularly regarding their families." "You're exactly right." Surziches nodded approvingly at Issei. "But there are things I can grant you, nonetheless. First, I'll arrange for your performances in the match to be counted as a passing grade for the combat portion of the middle class testing. When the time comes for you to take the tests, and I have a feeling that it'll be sooner rather than later, you'll have 1/3 of it already done." Issei blinked, a surprised smile appearing on his face. He looked at Sona and she nodded, also looking pleased. Apparently, this was as good as it sounded. "That's great." Surziches smiled again. "Second, Sona, what you asked for before. You have it now. And not just for Issei-kun." That smile of his turned almost impish. "This is probably pushing the limits of acceptable nepotism, but it's accepted that upper-class devils act as patron to the peerages of their family and friends." Sona brightened even more. "Thank you, Surziche-sama. That's quite gracious of you." Issei had to agree. This all but assured that he would make middle class in the no-too-distant future. He wasn't as convinced about a rapid ascent to high class, but Sona seemed to believe it, and she had the better judgment in this case. He really was on the fast track now. And so was the rest of the peerage, which made it even better. To have his girls, my girls, he thought giddily, on the same level with him. Surziches nodded. "This is a case where all of us will benefit from the arrangement." He shook his head, his smile becoming slightly wistful. "I just wish we could solve the problem of Ria's future suitors as easily." "That's easy." All eyes shifted to Serafal, and the Leviathan grinned impishly. "Tell everyone that Ryatan's fallen for Ikin." Issei's eyes bugged out and he stared, slack-jawed at her. He could feel Kaori's surprise and that of the rest of his peerage mates. "Sarani," he blurted out in protest. "That's insane. That'll never." He trailed off as Sona and Ria's expression sank in. Neither of them looked surprised or particularly displeased by the suggestion. "What are you two up to?" he asked slowly. "We'd already reached that conclusion last night, Issei-kun," Sona told him, reaching for his left hand. The best way to keep Ria's would-be husbands at bay is to let it slip that she's in love with someone already. Me? He said flatly. No one who knows us will buy that. Senpai's like a big sister to me. That's not necessarily a deal-breaker in Devil Society, Ria's commented dryly. But I feel the same way about you. Her smile was slightly tart, matching her tone. And this is temporary, right? Kaori asked warily. You're not going to change your mind and actually fall for him. Her tone clearly said you had better not, and the sudden tension rising through his other lovers suggested that they shared the sentiment. She seemed to be settling into the idea of being one of his fiancés very easily, Issei thought. No, she won't, Sona answered firmly. We discussed that at length. Ria shrugged. I trust Hyoudou-kun. But that kind of love. I don't feel any such spark, and I know he doesn't. Her tart smile shifted to a smirk. After all, I'm not his type. That is going to end up quoted on my grave, Issei muttered as a chuckle rippled around the room. The point is that doing this will keep those idiots at bay until I can find a fiancé who I actually get along with, Ria's continued. Or find some other solution. She sobered slightly. Hyoudou-kun, I know I've already asked a lot of you, and you've already delivered. But this would help a lot. Issei's expression clearly said I actually have a choice in the matter. After a moment, though, he let out a heavy sigh. Sona-chan, there's no other way. Short of shooting every other pillar family male of our age group in the head, no, Sona said flatly. And no, that's not an option, I'm afraid, she sighed, as Issei opened his mouth to agree. I promise, Anata, this arrangement will end the moment there's a real solution. And Riaz has agreed not to interfere in our family's affairs. She said the last part slowly, as if the knowledge that they really had a harem was only now sinking in. This knowledge will be for underworld circulation only. It should have no spillover into the school. Issei glanced around at his other lovers, gauging their reactions. None of them seemed particularly thrilled about it. Kaori, especially, looked like she was considering telling Riaz that she could solve her own damned problems. Issei could relate. But each of them seemed to accept the necessity, or were at least resigned to it. He squared his shoulders and nodded. All right. Under the circumstances, I can accept this. It really is a pity that Surziches started to say. No. No, it isn't, Issei, Sona, and Riaz said in unison. Sona straightened Issei's shirt, buttoning it all the way up, and knotted the string tie neatly. It was really weird to actually wear the uniform neatly, but the way her eyes lit up as she looked at him made it worthwhile. His uniform blazer was still around her shoulders, though, and she showed no sign of removing it. She gave his shirt a last firm tug and eyed him approvingly. Almost perfect. What am I missing? Issei asked curiously. You're dressed, Sona replied, the corners of her mouth turning upwards. Issei burst out in pleased laughter. No one at school would believe that Shitori Sauna was capable of even the most indirect bawdiness, but he knew better. So are you, he replied with a grin of his own. Let's fix that. Tonight, she promised. I'm sure Kaori and the others would be less than thrilled if we were late. Yeah, you're right, he agreed. The thought of seeing Kaori again and the others wafted through his mind like a soothing, sweet-smelling breeze. It brought with it the memory of waking up with Kaori curled up on his left side, half naked and clutching him like a body pillow. She'd had to hurry and teleport home before her parents found out she wasn't there. You two seem to be in a hurry, Rio noted cheerily as they came down the stairs. She offered them both handkerchief-wrapped pack-a-gays. A light breakfast for your walk. Thanks, Ka-san, Issei told her gratefully. He and Sona made their goodbyes and left the house. Kaori waited outside the gate for them, brightening as she saw them. Morning, she said brightly. Hi there, Issei said in return, his grin widening. Good morning, Kaori, Sona replied, looking serenely satisfied. Kata-san isn't with you? I told her I'd meet her at school. She's asking about how things went with the boy I said I liked. She bit her lip thoughtfully. Explaining this will be interesting. You can blame everything on me if you want, Issei offered as they walked. He unwrapped the small package Rio had given him, breaking off a chunk of toast, and offered it to Kaori. Kaori shook her head. It's nice of you to offer, but that would just make things worse. Sona-san, maybe we need to have another meeting with her? Probably. Sona was doing likewise, although she nibbled rather than devouring at Issei's frantic pace. Dinner someplace, then. Something that will help create a relaxed atmosphere. She smiled as a fourth person joined them. Good morning, Tsubasa. Mornin'. Tsubasa sketched a mock salute to her fiancé and co-fiancés. You look pensive, Kaori. Just trying to figure out how to sell my best friend on ice, the knight said. She's finally convinced he's not gonna regress to perverted dual levels, but this might set her back. Issei opened his mouth and she shook her head firmly. Nah. I don't regret this. You're stuck with me, Hyoudou Issei. I don't think he ever doubted that, Sona noted, squeezing Issei's hand. He squeezed back. Well, I want to make sure he doesn't, Kaori replied. She squeezed his other hand. Now if only Ice-chan had a third hand, Tsubasa joked. Kaori slid her hands up his arm. There you go. That's much better. Tsubasa took hold of his now free hand. Won't this make walking awkward? Issei asked. Indeed, he was having to concentrate in order not to stumble, although that might have more to do with being pawed at by three beautiful girls. So? The three girls said in unison, their tones blithe. After a moment, the four of them burst out laughing. Looks like there's a story there, Aika commented. She and Ria fell into step with Issei and the others, and something inside him relaxed as their scents mingled. This smelled like home. Loud, he said, Basa-chan's complaining that I only have 2 arms. It's not like I'm a Hindu god or something. It's just as well, Sona noted. It's not outside the realm of possibility that you'll meet some of the diva. It's weird to think about us moving in those kinds of circles, Kaori said softly. Aika, Ria, I think parts of his shoulders are free. At this rate, you 5 will have to carry me, Issei joked. I'll wait till I can get him alone later, Ria replied with a smirk, then shook her head. I don't like that we can't be open about this at school. It can't be helped. Aika didn't look particularly pleased about it either, and she did wrap her arm around Issei's other bicep. Ikun's rep is only now starting to get better, and there are too many people still willing to think the worst of him. Not to mention those 2 idiots. She blew out an irritated breath. We should enjoy this when we can. We still have the council office and the programming club, Aika-san, Issei reminded her in a reassuring tone. Don't sand me anymore, she said. Her cheeks were unusually pink, her tone more subdued than normal, and it was rather becoming. Just Aika. A look passed between her and Kaori, and it was a rarity to see the good-natured smirk on Kaori's face, while Aika wore a slightly abashed look. Aika. Issei smiled at her, and she returned it. Welp, there's the gate. He looked up at Tsubasa's words, and indeed the academy gate loomed ahead. It was surprisingly quiet, even deserted, for this time of morning. Tsubasa let out an irritated breath of her own and let go of his arm. Aika's lips compressed into a thin line, and after a moment, she did likewise. Kaori's hand lingered in Issei's until other students came into view, and she let go with a slightly petulant sigh. As Issei-kun said, we still have the council office and outside school. Sona's tone was gentle and reassuring. And my home. We have plenty of places to be us. She managed to pack a world's worth of meaning into that single world, and Issei felt himself heartened by it. He could tell, from the body language of his other lovers, that they felt the same. Yeah, he agreed. He caught their eyes in turn, soaking in their faces. Sona wore a reassuring smile. Kaori did as well, but hers was subtler, more laced with wryness. Tsubasa's face wore a ready-to-take-on-the-world grin, as if she savored the idea of facing the challenges ahead. Aika smirked knowingly. Ria smiled slowly, her eyes sparkling with mischief. For a moment, he inhaled, the combined scent of his loves relaxing and invigorating him. How could they fail at anything if they were together? Shall we? He said, nodding at the gate. Sona nodded. Let's go. Lead the way, Ice, Kaori said, gesturing. Because rooks are supposed to tank, Aika added with a chuckle. Tank, hell. I'll push you out first tomorrow, Aika, Tsubasa mock threatened, her eyes twinkling. Yes. Ria dimpled. We're with you, Ikun. You don't know how glad I am for that, Issei said sincerely. The 6 of them stepped through the campus gate, their heads held high. End of the part 6. So how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.